Chapter 2943. In the sky-ceiling ancient city, a mysterious fluctuation spread out from the sky-ceiling peak. Everyone in the sky-ceiling ancient city sensed it. No matter what they were doing, they all stopped and turned to look at the sky-ceiling peak and the sky-ceiling tombstone at the peak. There seemed to be a faint sound of the great Tao echoing between heaven and earth. It was vast and indiscernible, but it was clear to everyone's ears. In the next moment, the sealed sky monument trembled and a silver light shot out from it. It was like a peerless sword light, carrying a monstrous sword intent. It pierced through the sky and pierced through the 9 heavens. It was so dazzling, so eye-catching, so dazzling. Another person has successfully left his name. Who is it? After so many years, someone has finally left his name. It's really not easy. Geniuses would come to challenge the sealed sky monument from time to time, but no one had succeeded in the past few years. Now, someone had finally succeeded. It was worthy of celebration. Under the sealed sky monument, Yu Feilong was extremely excited. After a long while, he gradually calmed down and exhaled a long breath. I finally did it. Yu Feilong's voice was very low, but his face was filled with indescribable ecstasy. Flying Dragon Divine Sword Yu Feilong. Henceforth, it was no longer a title, but a title. The last 3 words did not need to be carved on the monument, but were automatically generated by the sealed sky monument. A title and a title were completely different. At this moment, Yu Feilong could feel that his connection with heaven and earth was becoming deeper and clearer. The mysteries of heaven and earth that he felt were vague in the past were gradually becoming clearer now. Leaving one's name on the sealed sky monument was not only a reputation benefit, but also a substantial benefit. It was a closer connection with the great Tao origin of heaven and earth, making it easier to comprehend. Yu Feilong turned around and swept his gaze across the crowd. At this moment, his attitude had changed, and he felt like he was looking down on them. It was like an ordinary person suddenly being rewarded by the imperial court and becoming a high-ranking official, holding great power. From now on, he would no longer be associated with ordinary people, but be above them. Seeing Yu Feilong's gaze, many people snorted. Chen Zong's expression did not change, and he ignored Yu Feilong. Another person went up to challenge, but he was still unable to leave his name behind. One of them had already carved his title, but in the end, he also failed, as if he was missing something. After countless years, many people had been studying the names left on the sealed sky stele. However, until now there was no clear conclusion. There were only some guesses. Failure. One by one, Chernzong was the only one left. However, no one felt that Chernzong would be able to leave his name on the heaven-sealing monument. Since ancient times, in the vast majority of the same batch, only one person would be able to leave their name behind. It was extremely rare for 2 people to appear. Chernzong took a step forward. Under the control of his super strength, Chernzong was able to resist the pressure of the invisible force field while walking forward. It was not difficult at all. Step by step, Chernzong walked towards the sealed sky monument. When he was about 11 meters away from the sealed sky monument, Chernzong took a step forward. However, he did not step on the ground. Instead, he stepped on the air. The air seemed to have solidified. Under Chernzong's step, layers of ripples spread out. When he took the second step, he also stepped on the air. It was as if there was an invisible staircase. Step by step, with each step, he would be about a meter higher. When Chernzong approached the sealed sky monument, he had taken a total of 9 steps. He was 1 head taller than the sealed sky monument and was 2 meters away from it. At this distance, if he stretched out his hand, he would still be more than a meter away from the sealed sky monument. However, if he held a sword, it would be just right. The moment Chernzong's body was suspended in the air, Chernzong felt a force constantly pressing down from above. It wanted to suppress his body and make it impossible for him to remain suspended in the air. In an instant, he drew his sword. The sword flashed and moved freely. The tip of the sword fell on the sealed sky monument and cut it open. However, Chunzong also felt a resistance. A very strong resistance was blocking the tip of his sword. This was a confrontation of strength. In an instant, Chunzong understood that forcefully resisting would only cause the speed of his sword to become slower and slower. In the end, it would come to a halt and then fail. Only by taking advantage of the situation and borrowing strength would he be able to draw better. Under the One Heart Sutra, Chunzong's thinking speed was extremely fast. In an instant, he understood this point. The way he channeled his strength immediately changed. The difficult and obscure feeling of resistance also changed in an instant. It was much lighter. In the blink of an eye, the first word was drawn by Chunzong. None. So fast. How can he be so fast? Anyone who had challenged the sealed sky monument to leave their name knew that the resistance on the sealed sky monument was very strong. It was very shocking. They had also resisted it and used all kinds of methods, but in the end they all failed. Only Yu Feilong succeeded. However, Yu Feilong also knew how difficult it was. He had really done his best to leave his name. But now, seeing Chunzong's drawing speed was so fast, more than twice as fast as his own, Yu Feilong was shocked and could not understand. How could this be? How could this be? After drawing the first word, Chunzong had another flash of understanding. He could not stop, not even the slightest pause. Otherwise, once he stopped, even if it was only for a moment, it would lead to failure. The reason why he was able to remain floating in the air was because of the mysterious power that was engraved on the heaven-sealing tablet. That was why he was able to remain floating in the air and not fall. However, if he stopped, he would lose the support of that mysterious power and directly fall. The second word was double. Unparalleled. The two words were directly drawn by Chunzong. Then, the third word was sword. The sword of swordsmanship, the sword of Kendo doctrine. Everyone stared and held their breaths, as if they were afraid of disturbing Chunzong. In fact, even if they shouted and shouted, they could not disturb Chunzong at all, because Chunzong could not hear any of their voices. This was a kind of protection of the sealed sky field. It protected the challenger from being disturbed by external forces and failed. The fourth word was also drawn by Chunzong's sword. Emperor. Unparalleled Jiandi. Chunzong's drawing speed was very fast and very smooth. It was like moving clouds and flowing water, giving people a kind of artistic beauty. It was as if a master of calligraphy was splashing ink with a brush. Compared to Chunzong's drawing, Yu Feilong's drawing was like a child drawing randomly with a twig. The difference was huge. They did not understand why Chunzong was so relaxed. Of course, they also knew that this did not mean that Chunzong was stronger than them. There must be other reasons. Yu Feilong's expression was extremely ugly. Putting aside whether Chunzong would be able to leave his name behind in the end, the speed Chunzong had displayed was simply too fast. It was completely faster than him, not even taking half the time he took. Moreover, the way Chunzong drew was extremely beautiful. It was not something he could compare with. When the tip of the sword left the sealed sky monument, the mysterious power disappeared. Chunzong's body fell with it. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and he was as elegant as a sword immortal descending to the mortal world. Everyone's eyes fell on the sealed sky monument. To be precise, they were looking at the four big words on the monument. Unparalleled Jiandi. Unparalleled Jiandi. How arrogant. Someone could not help but whisper. Although there was no distinction between the titles on the sealed sky monument, in people's minds, there was a distinction. King and Emperor. In terms of perception, Emperor was always a higher level than King. However, in terms of personal strength, Emperor was not necessarily stronger than King. However, that was how a kind of cognition was. It was a kind of subjective cognition, a kind of feeling. Moreover, the two words unparalleled were already very shocking. Unparalleled, unparalleled, unparalleled in the world, and so on already gave people a very shocking feeling. Adding the two words Jendi to it, it was even more shocking. Chunzong's original title of Unparalleled Sword had already caused many people to cry out in surprise. There were all kinds of discussions. Now that Unparalleled Sword had become Unparalleled Jendi, it was even more shocking. Specks of silver light suddenly appeared on the four words Unparalleled Jendi, attracting everyone's attention and attention. Gradually, the silver light became denser and denser. It flowed like water, and also like a gust of wind blowing past. Seeing this scene, the hearts of the people trembled. Did he succeed? Was he going to successfully leave his name? Sure enough, the four words Unparalleled Jendi were completely covered by the silver light. As if it had come to life, it emitted an earth-shattering sword intent. The sword intent was high and mighty, like an emperor. It carried an astonishing might as it rapidly spread out and filled the entire sealed sky monument. At the same time, an invisible ripple spread out from the sealed sky peak and swept through the entire sealed sky ancient city. Once again, the people of sealed sky ancient city felt it. What's going on? This feeling, could it be the people who had already been shocked once were shocked again? Someone had left their name on the sealed sky monument again? What day was it today? Two people had successfully left their names on the sealed sky monument? Shock. Indescribable shock. In the next moment, a silver sword light shot out from the sealed sky monument at the top of the sealed sky peak. It seemed to pierce through the 9 heavens, sweeping up the clouds and shattering everything. The light was so dazzling, so eye-catching, so resplendent, as if the Milky Way was hanging upside down. That silver light was so magnificent and beautiful. Chen Zong stared at it, his eyes reflecting it. He was indescribably intoxicated. As the silver light shot up to the sky, Chen Zong also felt that some kind of barrier between him and this world seemed to have been broken by the light. It was rapidly shattering, and the connection between him and this world became clearer and clearer. This feeling was extremely wonderful. It was as if a fish had entered the water and began to swim, recovering its vitality and vitality. The silver light dissipated, leaving behind specks of starlight. The four words Unparalleled Jendi continued to flow with silver light. Behind the four words, two more words appeared, surname and first name. Chunzong. Unparalleled Jendi Chunzong. The name Unparalleled Jendi Chunzong had been left on the sealed sky monument. From now on, Chunzong's name would spread throughout the world. It was truly spreading throughout the world. It was even more effective than Chunzong's repeated challenges. This way, if Yu Nianxin was really in the inner universe, he would know that Chunzong had come. Chapter 2944. Leaving their names on the sealed sky tablet. There are actually 2 of them. This is amazing. This time, 2 people have left their names on the sealed sky tablet in succession. In the sealed sky ancient city, countless people were discussing animatedly. They put down the things they were doing because they were so excited that they didn't want to do anything at all. They just wanted to find someone to discuss and express the excitement in their hearts. There was no way not to be excited. Even if the people who left their names on the sealed sky tablet were not them and had nothing to do with them, it was still an honor to be able to witness it with their own eyes. At the top of the sealed sky peak, under the sealed sky tablet, Chunzong didn't move. Instead, he stood in place and stared at the 6 small words on the sealed sky tablet. They were shining with silver light and were arranged behind the other silver light titles. There was no distinction between high and low titles. They were arranged according to the order in which they left their names. As he stared, the barrier between Chunzong and this world was constantly disappearing, and his compatibility with this world was constantly improving. Vaguely, Chunzong also felt a kind of invisible attention. It was as if the will of heaven was paying attention to him, as if an invisible eye was staring at him. Chen Zong didn't panic at all because this was the will of heaven in the ancient mysterious world of the inner universe. When he was in the outer universe, Chen Zong was favored by the will of the universe, so he was very clear about this feeling. When he first entered the inner universe, Chen Zong wasn't suppressed by the will of heaven and earth because this place was too advanced. Even if an outsider entered, he wouldn't be suppressed, but he wouldn't be able to gain any benefit. It was like a tourist who could look and find things, but he didn't have any authority. As a result, Chen Zong's cultivation remained stagnant. Even if he comprehended, his progress was slow. If it were not for the fact that he had accumulated enough knowledge and broken through to a new level in his basic sword techniques, Chen Zong's battle prowess probably would not have been able to reach the final extreme. He would still be at the minor extreme. Fortunately, the breakthrough in his basic swordsmanship was made in the ancient mysterious world of the inner universe. To a certain extent, it also shook the sword principle origin of the ancient mysterious world, making Chen Zong's improvement in swordsmanship more effective. Previously, Chen Zong had used the 2 lotus seeds of the innate sacred lotus. Rather than saying that it allowed Chen Zong to get closer to the great Tao of heaven and earth, it was more accurate to say that it temporarily removed the barrier between himself and this world. When the power of the 2 lotus seeds was exhausted, the barrier appeared again. It was as if a layer of fog had covered it, making it very unclear. But now the barrier had really disappeared, and the layer of fog was also disappearing. It became increasingly clear, as if the clouds had parted to reveal the moon. That feeling of clarity made Chen Zong extremely moved. Chen Zong couldn't miss such a great opportunity. Others, such as Yu Feilong, who had successfully left their names on the ceiling sky steel, definitely wouldn't have such a clear and strong feeling like Chen Zong. Because they were originally from the ancient mysterious world, there was no barrier between them. Leaving their names on the ceiling sky steel only strengthened the connection between them. After the barrier disappeared, all the mysteries of heaven and earth seemed to be directly revealed. It was clearer and stronger than when he used the lotus seeds of the innate sacred lotus. Chen Zong knew that this feeling was because the barrier had disappeared in an instant. If he got used to it after a period of time, the feeling wouldn't be so strong. This was an opportunity, a good opportunity to deepen his comprehension. He couldn't miss it. Chen Zong operated the Heart Sutra at full force. But this time, Chen Zong only comprehended the sword principle. With the help of the Heart Sutra, he comprehended the sword principle wholeheartedly. The efficiency was simply indescribable. It was extremely fast and amazing. Why did he only comprehend the sword principle? Chen Zong knew that Yu Feilong must be waiting for him to deal with him. Yu Feilong's battle strength was already at the transcendent realm. After leaving his name on the ceiling sky steel, his strength would more or less increase. Therefore, he focused on comprehending his own sword principle to improve it and directly increase his battle strength. As for the other aspects, he would think about it later. Under the Heart Sutra, he comprehended the sword principle at full force. The efficiency was simply beyond Chen Zong's expectations. It had reached an unimaginable level. With every breath, Chen Zong could feel his sword principle improving. This improvement was the continuous excavation of the potential of the sword principle. 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. As the excavation continued, it became more and more amazing. The breakthrough of the basic sword principle to a whole new level brought about shocking changes to Chen Zong. Even after a year of continuous challenges, Chen Zong still hadn't excavated the potential of the new level of the basic sword principle. There was at least half of it left. Now, this potential was being rapidly excavated by Chen Zong. The speed was astonishing and the efficiency was superb. The progress was so terrifying that even Chen Zong himself was shocked. Unfortunately, this couldn't last long. As time passed, about a quarter of an hour later, the effect of the comprehension gradually weakened. This was something that couldn't be helped, because Chunzong had begun to adapt to the mysteries of heaven and earth of the ancient mystic world. It wasn't until 2 hours later that Chunzong completely adapted to the mysteries of heaven and earth of the ancient mystic world. There was no longer the slightest barrier. Of course, the strong feeling of clarity also disappeared and was replaced by normalcy. Well, it was like a person who had been carrying a heavy load of thousands of kilograms all year round, staggering forward with difficulty. All of a sudden, the heavy load was unloaded and he became incomparably relaxed in an instant. He felt as if he could fly. However, this relaxed and carefree feeling would weaken and disappear with the passage of time. It was only because he had adapted to the feeling of not carrying a heavy load. After 2 hours, Chunzong stopped comprehending and lost the boost. If he continued to comprehend, he could still continue to improve, but it wouldn't be as fast. Since that was the case, there was no need to rush. Looking at the sealed heaven monument again, on top of it, the words Peerless Jendi Chunzong were flashing with silver light, so clear and eye-catching. Compared to most of the other titles, the light was more dazzling. This was because Chunzong's title was new, and so was the Soaring Dragon Divine Sword Yu Feilong's title. As for the other titles, they had been around for a period of time, at least a few years, so their light was more obscure. Turning around, Chunzong's gaze swept across the crowd. Most people didn't dare to look at Chunzong. There was no other reason than because Chunzong's power was too tyrannical. First, it was the power of leaving his name on the sealed heaven monument, then the power of comprehending it. Only Yu Feilong's eyes were staring at Chunzong, flashing with light. Chunzong, do you dare to fight with me? Yu Feilong's eyes became sharper, as if he wanted to pierce through Chunzong. Why not? Chunzong replied, neither too fast nor too slow. Just as well, his sword principle had improved, and his battle strength had soared. He should have reached the level of the transcendent plane without a doubt. There was nothing to be afraid of fighting with Yu Feilong. Even if Yu Feilong didn't invite him to fight, Chunzong planned to create an opportunity to test his strength. Very well. Yu Feilong's lips curled into a cold smile. Immediately, he walked down the sealed heaven peak. However, Yu Feilong didn't go down the mountain directly. Instead, he found a rock 900 meters above the sealed heaven peak and slashed out with his sword. A resounding dragon roar suddenly rang out. Soon after, a ray of sword light slashed out and landed on the rock, leaving behind a sword mark. The sword mark looked like a flying dragon. In the next moment, the rock immediately changed, turning into a sword-shaped stone tablet that stood tall. This scene made Chunzong secretly surprised. So this was how the martial arts stone tablets were left here. After Yu Feilong left the martial arts stone tablet, he turned around and glanced at Chunzong. Chunzong glanced around and found an empty rock. He unsheathed his sword and instantly slashed out. The sword light broke through the air and directly slashed the rock, leaving a deep sword mark. It's so hard. Chunzong was secretly surprised by the hardness of the rock. It was incomparable to ordinary rock. In the next moment, the stone seemed to have been transformed by a layer of formless power and turned into the shape of a sword. It stood tall on heaven's ceiling peak. Traces of Chunzong's sword were left on it, and it contained the secrets of Chunzong's swordsmanship. However, it was only part of the secrets and not all of them. This way, it would be enough for the future generations to comprehend. The further down the mountain, the lighter the pressure was and the faster the speed. Chunzong also followed. Let's go. Let's follow and see. The people who failed to leave their names on the sealed heaven tablet felt that there was no point in staying. After all, this was a battle between experts who left their names on the sealed heaven tablet. Such a battle was rare. Soon, Yu Feilong and Chunzong descended the sealed heaven peak. The pressure disappeared immediately and the two of them sped up, flying out of the sealed heaven ancient city. The rules of the sealing heaven ancient city were very clear. Fighting was not allowed within the city. Once someone violated this rule, the consequences would be very serious. The lightest punishment would be to be caught and punished, while the heaviest punishment would be to be suppressed and captured on the spot, or even killed. No matter what, it was not a good thing. Just the punishment alone would not only cost the offender over 10,000 cultivation coins, it would also be a disgrace. If they wanted to fight, there was only one way, and that was to leave the sealed heaven ancient city. That way, they would not violate the rules of the sealed heaven ancient city. Although they could not fly, Yu Feilong and Chunzong were very fast. Yu Feilong's figure was as nimble as a swimming dragon. He rushed through the streets of the sealed heaven ancient city and headed towards the city gate. Chunzong followed closely behind. His figure was also very agile, like a gust of wind. He was not obstructed in the slightest. Follow. Quick, quick. The people who came down from the sealed heaven peak quickly followed, causing many cultivators on the streets of the sealed heaven ancient city to be astonished. What's going on? Someone immediately asked. The two new experts who left their names on the sealed heaven tablet are going to fight. Someone casually replied while running quickly. What? The two new experts who left their names on the sealed heaven tablet are going to fight. Quick, follow. The news quickly spread like a storm. It was so quick that even more people began to move, quickly heading out of the heaven-sealing ancient city. Yu Feilong and Chunzong also rushed out of the sealed heaven ancient city. Chapter 29:45. Outside the sealing heaven ancient city, about 100 miles away, there was a piece of empty land that was dozens of miles wide. The surface of the land was full of potholes and ruins, and there were countless rocks and ravines. It looked like a battlefield. In fact, it was not allowed to fight in the sealed heavens ancient city. Once cultivators had any conflicts that needed to be resolved, they would come outside the city. This place was one of the most common battlegrounds for cultivators to resolve their conflicts and grievances. It was also the closest and most convenient location to the sealed heavens ancient city. In this piece of empty land, Yu Feilong and Chunzong were 100 meters apart, facing each other. Many people had gathered around the empty land, all of them here to watch the battle. It was an honor to be able to watch a battle between two people who had left their names on the sealed heavens monument. This was an extremely rare opportunity. Yu Feilong's tyrannical aura continued to spread out, rushing in all directions. There seemed to be a faint dragon roar, causing his aura to become even more tyrannical. In the next breath, Yu Feilong drew his sword. A sword light flashed as sword howls sounded out like the roars of dragons, and they grew louder and louder. They repelled the surroundings and shook out layer upon layer of ripples that wantonly spread out, causing a strong storm to sweep up and blow the shattered rocks on the ground in the surroundings to the point they rolled about. The sword will soared into the sky, and the high-pitched dragon roar became more and more astonishing. It was as if it had shattered the clouds, stirring up the surroundings, and was vast and mighty. An astonishing sword Dao momentum also spread out. What a powerful sword will! The spectators were shocked, and there was no lack of transcendent realm experts among them. After all, there was a difference between leaving one's name on the sealed heavens monument and leaving one's name on the sealed heavens monument was equivalent to obtaining the recognition of the ancient profound world's heavenly will. There would be an invisible boost when using the great Tao origin power that one had mastered. With the eruption of Yu Feilong's sword intent, the tyrannical sword aura also came crashing down without any hesitation. The formless pressure seemed to cause the ground to cave in, and countless rocks were crushed once again. Chunzong squinted his eyes and immediately sensed that Yu Feilong's sword intent had become even stronger. Compared to before, it was at least several times stronger. The battle prowess of the surpassing realm had increased by several times, which was undoubtedly a shocking increase. Erupt! Chunzong's sword will also erupted. Monstrous sword will and sword will were extremely overbearing. As soon as it appeared, it rushed straight up as if it had shattered the 9 heavens. It was as if it could cleave through an army of thousands and sweep everything before it. This sword intent was grand and overbearing to the extreme, and it was also boundlessly sharp. It was as if nothing in the world could resist it. The spectators became more and more shocked. In the next moment, the two sword wills collided. This was the sword wills of the transcendent realm. They were extremely powerful sword wills. The power that burst out from the collision was even more terrifying. The two sword wills that were derived from the two sword wills also collided with shocking power. Rumble. It was as vast and mighty as thunder, but there was no thunder. There was only the sound of the collision of the two sword wills. It was extremely shocking, and the power that erupted was also incomparable. It suppressed everything. The rocks that had been crushed once again were directly crushed by this terrifying power, turning into dust and flying everywhere. Yu Feilong's face involuntarily darkened. Previously, he had fought Chen Zong. With just a few exchanges of swords, he knew that Chen Zong was at the final realm and was no match for him. If the battle continued, he would be suppressed or even killed by him. But now, although he had not drawn his sword to fight, the sword will and sword will that erupted from Chen Zong was not inferior to his own. It was extremely overbearing and shocking. How could this be? Could it be that Chen Zong had gained more benefits after leaving his name on the sealing heaven tablet than he had? This seemed to be impossible. No matter what, Chen Zong's sword will and sword will were so overbearing that it exceeded Yu Feilong's expectations. However, he was the one who initiated this battle. If he ended it now, it would undoubtedly be humiliating, very humiliating. Moreover, Yu Feilong did not believe that Chen Zong's combat strength could really increase to the point where he could contend with him in a short period of time. He had to eliminate Chen Zong in this battle. I admire your courage. Yu Feilong's lips curled into a confident smile. Today will be a very special day. It will be a day that will be remembered by future generations. We will witness two people leaving their names on the sealing heaven tablet, and we will also witness one of them falling here. The meaning behind his words was none other than that Chen Zong would die here today, under his sword. When the people around heard this, they were shocked and their expressions changed. Was this battle a battle to the death? When they thought of this, they felt excited for no reason. There was a difference between a battle that determined victory and a battle that determined life and death. If it was a battle of life and death, then they would not hold back at all. If it was a battle of life and death, then they would not hold back at all. They would use all their means and even their trump cards just to fight to the death. In this way, a battle to the death would often be more intense and exciting than a battle to the death. It won't be me. Chen Zong narrowed his eyes and replied unhurriedly. Since Yu Feilong's goal was to kill him, he would not show mercy this time. Of course, he would not kill Yu Feilong, but it was not impossible to cripple Yu Feilong's cultivation. He would never tire of crippling people. As the two of them exchanged words, the sword will and sword will clashed even more fiercely. The aura became more and more terrifying. When the clash reached its peak, Yu Feilong exploded. His figure flashed, and he stepped into the air like a flying dragon. He also slashed out with his sword. His body and sword became one. The power condensed and turned into a dragon-shaped sword light that tore through the sky. Wherever it passed, the void collapsed, leaving behind a shocking trail. Kill. Chen Zong could only vaguely see a flying dragon breaking through the sky, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It carried with it an astonishing power. He drew his sword. The sword light flashed and suddenly tore a crack as thick as a finger in the void. The crack quickly spread out like a bolt of black lightning. With this sword, Chen Zong knew that his combat strength had increased a lot compared to before. The space origin in the inner universe was more powerful, causing the space to be much stronger than in the outer universe. Therefore, it was dozens of times more difficult to tear the void here than in the outer universe. Now, Chen Zong felt that his sword could easily tear the void as quickly as a sharp blade cutting through paper. He knew that his strength had indeed increased a lot. The sword light clashed, and in an instant, an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing resounded. Countless sparks sputtered out. As a heaven-rank super-realm expert and a peerless genius, the sword in Yu Feilong's hand was naturally not an ordinary sword. It was a heaven-rank sword with extraordinary power. After Chen Zong's heavenly will sword had partially recovered, it was equivalent to a heaven-rank super-realm sword in this world. It was not weak at all. The moment the two swords clashed, the first ear-piercing sound rang out. Then, more ear-piercing sounds rang out continuously, becoming denser and more intense. The fierce battle was endless. Sparks sputtered wildly, covering all directions. The astonishing sword chi tore through everything and penetrated everything. It was as if nothing could stop it. The sword will swept out, causing the spectators to be shocked. As the battle raged on, the sword will and sword force seemed to be constantly pushed forward, becoming more and more tyrannical. The more they fought, the more shocked Yu Feilong became. Last time, he was able to suppress Chen Zong with his extremely powerful combat strength. But this time, he was unable to suppress Chen Zong. Yu Feilong even felt a strong threat from Chen Zong's swordsmanship. Slash! The dragon's roar suddenly exploded like rolling thunder. As the sword light surged, it carried with it an earth-shattering power and directly slashed without mercy. Chen Zong's body was instantly cut into pieces, but it was only an afterimage. The moment the sword light shattered the afterimage, it exploded and turned into dozens of dragon-shaped chi forces that rushed out, covering all directions and shattering everything. Yu Feilong's second sword fell again. A huge flying dragon sword light traversed the sky. It was at least 100 meters long, sweeping everything in its path. Great Flying Dragon Sword. It was Yu Feilong's best sword technique. Dragon soars to the 9th heaven. The flying dragon flew across the sky and locked onto Chen Zong by sensing his chi. It made Chen Zong feel that he could not dodge. No matter where he dodged, he would be pursued. Since that was the case, there was no need to dodge. He directly faced the attack head-on. He sheathed his sword and pulled it out again. Slash. Heavenly Light Sword Drawing Technique? Nature's Minute Dust. This sword was originally an extremely tyrannical sword technique. After being perfected again and again, it became even more tyrannical. Now that Chen Zong's combat strength had broken through the final realm and reached the transcendent realm, the power of this sword technique had reached an astonishing level. Smash! The dragon soars to the 9th heaven's sword light was immediately shattered and turned into nothingness. The power of the Nature's Minute Dust directly blasted towards Yu Feilong. It was extremely overbearing and terrifying. Yu Feilong's expression changed greatly. He paused and retreated in an instant like a flying dragon riding the sky. He made an arc and directly avoided the attack. He turned around and attacked with his sword. It was like a giant dragon reaching out its claws towards Chen Zong. Flying dragon claws. Sword after sword, like a flying dragon reaching out its claws, like a flying dragon swinging its tail, or like a flying dragon overturning the ground. The power of each sword was very tyrannical. One sword after another, each sword was fatal. Yu Feilong's full combat strength was unleashed. However, no matter how Yu Feilong unleashed his attacks, he could not really attack Chen Zong. He could not really threaten Chen Zong. Instead, under Chen Zong's swordsmanship and sword-way divine skill, each sword was neutralized by Chen Zong. The spectators retreated even further because the sword essence and sword force were too tyrannical. It was so tyrannical that they were trembling in fear. The more intense the battle was, the more serious Yu Feilong's expression became. His eyes became deeper and wisps of light condensed. The aura around him also became more terrifying. How did Chen Zong's combat strength increase to such a level? Yu Feilong became more and more shocked. It seemed that it would not be easy to defeat or even kill Qinzong. In this case, he had to unleash even more power. Bloodline. The bloodline of the five-clawed flying dragon was activated in an instant. The dragon's roar became louder and louder, becoming more and more frightening. Scales began to appear on Yu Feilong's skin. In the blink of an eye, they covered his entire body. Those were dragon scales. As the dragon scales appeared, Yu Feilong's aura rose steadily. Chapter 2946. Bloodline. It was a kind of power hidden in the body. If this power was weak, it was difficult to sense. If it was strong, it could even shatter the vacuum. The five-clawed flying dragon bloodline was a powerful bloodline. It was one of the heavenly bloodlines and was very famous. It was ranked higher than Tantai Baimu's breath of the wind bloodline, which had been destroyed by Qinzong. It was one of the top 10 bloodlines among the heavenly bloodlines. Its potential was amazing and its cultivation talent was also very outstanding. It was precisely because of the bloodline of the five-clawed flying dragon that Yu Feilong was able to cultivate to the level of super extreme before he was even 100 years old. Furthermore, he had successfully left his name on the sealed sky monument and obtained the title of Flying Dragon's Celestial Sword. From then on, his name would spread far and wide, and he would become one of the top geniuses in the ancient mystic world. There was a clear difference between those who had left their names on the sealed sky monument and those who had not. Now, Yu Feilong had stimulated the bloodline power of the five-clawed flying dragon bloodline. His whole body was covered with dragon scales, and a terrifying power spread throughout his body. His body became taller and stronger. Strands of powerful aura spread out and turned into cyclones that surged in all directions. Vaguely, the half-dragon Yu Feilong let out a roar that sounded like a dragon's roar. It became more and more resounding and his pupils changed greatly. A feeling of being high and mighty, as if he was looking down on all living things, swept past, causing the people in the surroundings to feel insignificant from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if a low-end life form had encountered a high-end life form. That feeling of being unable to control themselves and trembling uncontrollably was uncontrollable. Dragons were originally a very powerful life form, a very high-end life form. Naturally, the bloodline of dragons was also very extraordinary. Facing Yu Feilong, who had stimulated the five-clawed flying dragon bloodline, Qinzong could not help but feel awe. His expression became more and more dignified. Strong. At this moment, the aura that Yu Feilong exuded was more than twice as strong as before. The surging power continuously surged out from his body, repelling the air around him and forming a vacuum. Yu Feilong's arm was like a dragon's claw, tightly clasping the long sword. Strands of golden light spread out on the sword like veins, making the sword and his arm seem to be directly connected. The aura of the sword also increased by more than twice as much as before. The sword also grew larger and more compatible with Yu Feilong's current form. Dragon form. In the next breath, Yu Feilong directly waved the sword and slashed out a terrifying sword light. That sword strike was merciless. Just as Yu Feilong had said before, today was an extremely important day. It would be a day that the future generations would remember forever. That was because today, two people who had left their names on the heaven-sealing monument had appeared at the same time. Today, one of the people who had left their names on the heaven-sealing monument would be eliminated. Yu Feilong, who had activated the bloodline power of the five-clawed flying dragon, had his battle prowess soared to the extreme. His great flying dragon godly sword was also capable of surpassing his limits. Originally, the great flying dragon godly sword was created based on the five-clawed flying dragon's bloodline. It was most compatible with the power of the five-clawed flying dragon's bloodline. Slash. 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 The power of each slash was more than twice as strong as before. Each slash was accompanied by a resounding dragon's roar, bringing with it an astonishing power. Pressure. Wave after wave of terrifying pressure assaulted Yu Feilong as if there was no end to it. Yu Feilong, who had transformed into a dragon, waved his sword repeatedly, causing the sword to disappear. Only sword lights could be seen traversing the vast sky. Those sword lights were like flying dragons, dancing wildly in the sky. At a glance, it seemed as if there were dozens of golden flying dragons dancing and shuttling back and forth in the sky. Every sword-light dragon rushed towards Chen Zong. The sword power was terrifying and direct. For a moment, Chen Zong was besieged by dozens of sword-light dragons. He could only wave his sword continuously to resist the crazy attacks of the sword-light dragons. For a moment, it was difficult to find a chance to counterattack. However, Chen Zong's expression was calm, and there was no trace of panic in his heart. Instead, he calmly resisted and looked for a chance to counterattack. After Yu Feilong's dragonization, his entire state of mind changed. He became high and mighty, tyrannical and overbearing. It was as if everyone was like an ant in his eyes. If anyone dared to resist, he would kill them with a swing of his sword. Now, in his eyes, Chen Zong was an ant that could be killed with a swing of his sword. The dragonized Yu Feilong continued to swing his sword. He did not need to get close to Chen Zong. He only needed to swing his sword continuously. Every time he swung his sword, a golden sword-light dragon would appear in the sky. It was at least 10 meters long, and it carried a terrifying power as it shot down from the sky. It was as if it could break the sky, and it was merciless. Moreover, the sword-light dragon directly locked onto Chen Zong's chi. There was no way to dodge it. He could only resist it. One sword-light dragon was shattered by Chen Zong's sword. 2 sword-light dragons were also shattered by Chen Zong's sword. 3, 4, 5 However, Chen Zong could shatter one sword-light dragon after another. The sword-light dragon's power was not weak at all. Chen Zong's body continued to fall. When he fell to the ground, he was bombarded again and again. The ground caved in, and his whole body sank into the ground. Suddenly, Yu Feilong raised his sword, and a terrifying sword light wreaked havoc. Strands of dragon-patterned sword chi burst out, and sword light soared to the sky. In the sky, there seemed to be endless rumbling of thunder, shaking the surroundings. The sky shook and the earth shook. A terrifying aura spread out like a storm. Slash. Along with Yu Feilong's roar, the huge sword light directly slashed down. It turned into a golden sword light that was 100 meters long. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws. It was vivid and lifelike. It was like a real dragon that struck down from the sky. Before the 100-meter-long golden flying dragon was completely shot down, a second 100-meter-long golden flying dragon was formed and shot down as well. One after another, the golden dragons that were 100 meters long struck down with a terrifying force. There were a total of 9 of them, and each of them used up all of Yu Feilong's battle strength. Great Flying Dragon Celestial Sword? 9 Heavens Flying Dragon 9 kills. This move was the strongest unique skill of the Great Flying Dragon Celestial Sword. It was his ultimate move. However, because it was too powerful and consumed too much power, Yu Feilong could not perform it without activating the power of the 5-clawed Flying Dragon bloodline. However, after activating the power of the 5-clawed Flying Dragon bloodline, his strength increased a lot, and he could perform his strongest ultimate move. Chen Zong could not dodge this move. He could only resist it. True Sword Grinding Technique. Heavenly Light Sword Drawing Technique? Swallows fly twice. Heavenly Light Sword Drawing Technique? All creations dust. Heavenly Light Sword Drawing Technique? One sword piercing the 9 heavens. Burst. In just an instant, Chen Zong burst out continuously. The power of his cultivation poured out like a torrent. Even though Chen Zong had activated the heavenly gold sword body with all his strength and his body was strong, he still felt sore for a moment. It was as if he was being torn apart. Under the extreme burst of power, the sword light collided. The sky and the earth were shattered. Countless rays of light shot out. The earth shook and the void trembled. Terrifying storms swept up. The expressions of the spectators changed greatly. They were extremely shocked. They were horrified by the power of the collision. Their battle strength was not weak. There were low extremities, high extremities, and super extremities. However, they were not as strong as Chen Zong and Yu Feilong. When the sword light completely dissipated and the shocking tremors quieted down, Chen Zong had disappeared. Only a huge hole appeared in front of the crowd. Their expressions changed greatly. Looking at the hole, they felt a chill in their hearts. Terrifying. The hole was huge, and the aura it emitted was very shocking. It was the aura left behind by the previous attack. Chen Zong had disappeared. He must have been beaten to a pulp. His soul must have been scattered. Sure enough, today would be a day that would be remembered by the world. 2 people had left their names on the sealed sky monument, and 1 more person had been killed. It was equivalent to having his name removed from the sealed sky monument. Yu Feilong stood high above. His eyes flashed with an indifferent golden light. In the next moment, a sword will spread out from the huge hole. At first, it was very faint, like intermittent wisps of mist. However, it grew stronger and stronger. It surged up like a raging tide. It rushed up to the sky and tore the sky apart. Compared to before, this sword will seem to have changed. It was an indescribable transformation. Immediately after, a sword light soared into the sky from the pit. This time, I have to thank you. Chen Zong's robe was tattered. He stared at Yu Feilong with a smile on his face. It had to be said that thanks to Yu Feilong's violent attack, although Chen Zong was badly injured, he could naturally recover in an instant with the power of the mysterious seed. Moreover, the potential of the new realm of his basic sword techniques was completely developed by Chen Zong in this battle. Breakthrough. The continuous accumulation and precipitation in the past also erupted. Chen Zong's sword principal realm instantly soared. It surpassed the origin level and was infinitely close to the supreme level. There was another name for this level. It was called the quasi-supreme level. It was higher than the origin level and lower than the supreme level. It was between the 2 levels, but had a trace of the power of the supreme level. It was the quasi-supreme level. The quasi-supreme sword principal realm. The quasi-supreme sword realm. At this moment, Chen Zong was in such a state. It was a wonderful feeling. It was as if he would burst forth with a trace of inspiration on the sword principle at every moment. It was as if he was comprehending the sword principle all the time. The origin of sword principle in this world also became clearer. Strands of light flickered endlessly in Chen Zong's eyes. As he observed his surroundings, he saw strands of faintly discernible strands fluctuating endlessly. Those strands were so tiny that they were almost undetectable, disappearing in a flash as if they were an illusion. However, the instant Chen Zong saw those strands of light flickering and appearing, he felt a strange sensation. It was as if as long as he could capture those strands of light, he would be able to capture a unique trajectory that contained astonishing mysteries. Yu Feilong, who was in dragon form, was extremely powerful. He was undoubtedly an excellent candidate to test the sword principle. Let's have a taste of the quasi-supreme sword realm's power. Chapter 2947. The wind was strong and the sky was cloudless. Only the shocking sword intent kept gushing out, as if it could shatter the 9 heavens. It was getting more and more terrifying. This sword intent was surging out from Yu Feilong's dragonized body. It was extremely violent, like a raging tide. Chen Zong's sword intent didn't feel as strong as Yu Feilong's. On the contrary, it seemed to be very weak, but it also had a drifting and unpredictable feeling. If one were to sense it more carefully, they would discover the terror contained within. It was a great terror that could tear through everything. Facing the tyrannical sword intent of Yu Feilong, Chen Zong's expression didn't change. He used his own sword intent to resist the impact of Yu Feilong's tyrannical sword intent. He didn't move at all, and he was carefully comprehending the changes, especially the changes in his own sword intent. In the quasi-supreme sword principle realm, his sword intent had also risen to the quasi-supreme sword intent level. It had surpassed the origin sword intent, and was close to the supreme sword intent. The ultimate move of the great flying dragon godly sword, the 9 heavens flying dragon 9 kills, didn't kill Chen Zong. It even seemed that Chen Zong's robe was damaged, and he wasn't injured at all. Yu Feilong was puzzled. However, the truth was right in front of him. There was only one explanation. A supreme treasure, Yu Feilong murmured. His eyes shone with a cold light. Chen Zong must have some kind of healing treasure on him that could heal all injuries in an extremely short amount of time. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to be unharmed after taking on the 9 heavens flying dragon's 9 kills. He must have been injured and recovered with the help of some treasure. Yu Feilong's figure flashed across the sky. His body and sword became one, and he directly attacked. The golden dragon great sword slashed down. It was as if the sword could split the world, and he wanted to cut Chen Zong in half. Let's see what kind of ability your supreme treasure has. Yu Feilong's sword was extremely tyrannical. The void was directly cut open and then shattered. No matter what it would be cut open by this sword. Cut. Chen Zong didn't dodge at all. He stood there motionless, staring at the rapidly approaching Yu Feilong and his sword. After dragon forming, Yu Feilong's power was even stronger. His speed was also much faster. In the eyes of the other supreme experts, they could barely catch a glimpse of Yu Feilong's figure. It was very blurry. However, in Chen Zong's eyes, although Yu Feilong's speed was very fast, his figure was very clear, and his trajectory was also very clear. This was because when Yu Feilong's sword arrived, Chen Zong's eyes saw strands of silk appear on Yu Feilong's body. These silk strands were flickering and fluctuating, allowing Chen Zong to better predict the changes in his opponent's trajectory. In the next breath, Chen Zong swung his sword. It was a simple sword strike, a casual sword strike, but it gave people the feeling of a child casually swinging a tree branch, but it was not so simple and crude. When this sword strike was swung, it coincided with one of the flashing trajectories and locked onto Yu Feilong's subsequent changes. Yu Feilong suddenly realized that his sword strike, which carried an extremely terrifying power, seemed to be unknowingly weakened. This feeling was very strange. It was as if a gust of wind blew through dust, blowing up layer after layer of dust, causing the dust to constantly drift and eventually disappear. The power of this sword strike was also weakened to the extreme, unable to pose any threat to Chen Zong. Immediately after, Chen Zong's sword pierced towards Yu Feilong. The speed of the sword was not fast and appeared ordinary. However, it gave Yu Feilong a feeling that he could not dodge and could only block with his sword. With a slight but sharp clang, Chen Zong's sword struck Yu Feilong's sword. Yu Feilong's expression suddenly changed. He felt that it was just an ordinary sword strike, as if it didn't have much power. However, in an instant, an extremely terrifying power erupted, as if it was the full blow of an ancient beast puppet. He couldn't take it. The golden dragon greatsword bent in an instant. The terrifying power caused the bent greatsword to strike Yu Feilong's sternum. With a clear cracking sound, one of his ribs was broken and he was sent flying. Unbelievable! Dragonized Yu Feilong was stunned. It should be known that the strength of a dragon was extremely tyrannical and shocking, capable of shattering the heavens and the earth. The 5-clawed flying dragon was also a top-tier existence in the dragon clan. Once the power of the bloodline was stimulated, Yu Feilong's tyrannical strength directly increased by a lot. It could be said that among those at the same level, there were very few who could compete with him in terms of strength after activating the power of the bloodline. But now, he was repelled. It was just a sword strike, a seemingly ordinary sword strike. He didn't understand, but Chernzong himself understood why. It looked like a simple sword, but in fact it contained an extremely terrifying power. The advantage that the faintly discernible trajectory brought to Chernzong was a kind of deduction. It was as if he could foresee the opponent's next move, so he could react in advance. This was a change brought about by the quasi-supreme sword realm. Of course, in all fairness, it didn't bring much help to Chernzong, because Chernzong could deduce extremely quickly under the One Heart Sutra, and could vaguely foresee it. But if the opponent was too strong, the effect of the deduction would be constantly weakened. The trajectory brought about by the quasi-supreme sword realm was faintly discernible and hard to grasp. If it was always there, the significance would be completely different, and it would be of great help. However, Chernzong reckoned that it would only be like this when he reached the true supreme sword principle realm. The real improvement that the quasi-supreme sword realm brought to Chernzong was integration. Integrating one's swordsmanship and strength was like condensing different ropes and twisting them into one. It was different from the condensation in the past. It wasn't forcibly condensed, but condensed according to a certain pattern, coexisting with each other, and having both power and mystery. However, Chernzong knew that he was still exploring, and had only grasped the quasi-supreme sword realm in the initial stage. There was still great potential to be unearthed. Just this alone made his swordsmanship undergo a transformation. That sword strike appeared to be very ordinary, yet it had actually returned to its original state and was impossible to dodge. Moreover, it contained an extremely terrifying power that was powerful and overbearing to the extreme. When the sword struck Yu Feilong's sword, it was as if a star had collided with it, a world had collided with it. Its power was overbearing to the extreme. Yu Feilong was directly injured, although such an injury was nothing to him. With the awakening of the five-clawed flying dragon's bloodline, he could quickly recover from it. The second sword strike followed. The sword strike still gave people the feeling that it was so simple and understated, but the speed of the sword had increased by a few notches. Yu Feilong found that he still couldn't dodge it, and could only wave his sword to block it. Once again, his sword was struck, and the terrifying power pushed across, like the impact of an ancient mountain. He couldn't completely withstand it, and was sent flying again, spitting out 3 mouthfuls of blood. Chernzong stood still, and was already hundreds of meters away from Yu Feilong. He raised his sword again, and his eyes were calm and indifferent. He stared at Yu Feilong, who was hundreds of meters away, and made Yu Feilong feel that he couldn't dodge it no matter what. Chernzong couldn't dodge it. No matter how he changed, he couldn't dodge it. He waved his sword again. They were hundreds of meters apart, but the moment Chernzong waved his sword, it was as if he had crossed the distance in an instant, and the sword arrived. The third sword strike was even faster than the second. Yu Feilong was hit by the sword again, and was sent flying. This time, he spat out 5 mouthfuls of blood. Chernzong found that Yu Feilong's strong physique and powerful combat strength made him an excellent target for practicing swordsmanship. The superb realm of the quasi-supreme sword realm gave Chernzong more profound swordsmanship attainment. With this as the foundation, Chernzong integrated all the swordsmanship that he had learned and created. Heart swordsmanship, world swordsmanship, void kill swordsmanship, ancient swordsmanship. The mystery of each swordsmanship was extracted by Chernzong one by one, and then integrated into each sword strike. With each strike, Chernzong's swordsmanship improved, approaching the quasi-supreme swordsmanship. All swords in one. It was the same for swordsmanship, and so was swordsmanship. The mystery of thousands of swordsmanship all merged into one. That was the culmination of swordsmanship. It was the pinnacle and the strongest. This was Chen Zong's path of supreme swordsmanship. Different swordsmen had different swordsmanship and different swordsmanship. Chen Zong's path was to integrate the mystery of thousands of swordsmanship into one. This was the most difficult path and the most complicated way, because one had to constantly learn, comprehend, and see the mystery of various swordsmanship to absorb their essence. It was destined to take a long time. In addition to a long time, one had to have sufficient talent. Otherwise, if one did not have enough talent, no matter how hard one worked, it would be a waste of time. If one had enough talent, it would take a long time, 10 times or even dozens of times longer than others. Chen Zong was different. He had superb talent in the way of the sword. Coupled with his shocking comprehension ability and the assistance of the Heart Sutra, Chen Zong was able to save over 100 times the amount of time. That was why he could walk such a path. Even so, Chen Zong had a deep understanding of the hardship. If he did not have many opportunities, such as when some swordsmanship experts tried to take over his body, failed, and left their cultivation experience and comprehension of swordsmanship, and so on, and turned them into his own things, he was afraid that he would have to spend more than 10 times the time to get to this point. But he dared not say anything. Now that he had finally reached this level, he could continue to improve, and he could see the hope of continuing to improve. It was like a great road to heaven. One sword after another, each sword was faster than the last, more domineering than the last, and more mysterious than the last. However, every sword strike that he unleashed looked ordinary and mediocre. Each sword move was an integration, a kind of improvement. Chen Zong felt that his swordsmanship had improved, and he was not far from surpassing the origin swordsmanship and reaching the level of quasi-supreme swordsmanship. Chen Zong was immersed in this improvement, but Yu Feilong was not. He was hit again and was constantly injured. He spat out dozens of mouthfuls of blood, and the bloodline power of the five-clawed flying dragon was constantly being consumed. Yu Feilong's face was extremely pale, and his eyes were filled with exhaustion. 9 swords. It was just 9 swords, and he had fallen to this point. It was hard to believe. When he saw Chen Zong raise his sword again, his eyelids twitched unconsciously, and an indescribable fear suddenly erupted from the depths of his heart. Like a flood bursting a dam, it swept out crazily and spread to every part of his body, and he was trembling. Chapter 29:48. The 10th Sword. Chen Zong raised his sword, and the blade was at the same level as his chest. The sword slowly swept across the sky, and the index and middle fingers of his left hand were placed on the sword's spine. His eyes were fixed in front of him, looking at Yu Feilong, who was 1,000 meters away. After Yu Feilong deactivated his dragon form, his aura suddenly dropped a lot, and the tyrannical increase in strength also disappeared. Although he had blocked 9 of Chen Zong's swords, he was still injured. Each sword made him vomit blood, and now he had vomited dozens of mouthfuls of blood. If it were not for his strong cultivation, he would not have been able to hold on. Yu Feilong's face was pale and his limbs were weak. He even felt that he could not hold the sword in his hand. Yu Feilong knew that this was because he had vomited too much blood and lost too much blood. Without any hesitation, he swallowed the elixir that replenished his qi and blood. The elixir quickly dissolved and replenished his blood loss. His pale face quickly recovered, and he felt that he was not so weak anymore. However, when Chen Zong raised his sword again, he was horrified, because this sword seemed to be different from the previous 9 swords. It was slower. Just now, there was a time interval between Chen Zong's sword and the next one. The later it was, the longer the interval was. It seemed that he was comprehending, integrating, and improving before he attacked again. That was to say, he was using Yu Feilong as a sword test stone. Using a powerful opponent as a test stone was much better than a test stone that could not move or resist. The feedback it could give him would be even more intense and clear, and it would allow his swordsmanship to improve to the extreme. The 10th sword. This was the 10th strike that Chen Zong was about to unleash. In Chen Zong's mind, countless swordsmanship lights appeared. In his eyes there seemed to be thousands of figures, each of them wielding a sword. They would either stab out, slash horizontally, or slash out with their swords. The swordsmanship moves displayed by each figure holding a sword were different. Even if they were all stabbing straight, there were subtle differences. Gradually, the sword-wielding silhouettes began to converge. The silhouette that was thrusting out was like 10,000 swords returning to their origin. It was the same for the silhouette that was thrusting out horizontally. In the end, they turned into 9 figures, each performing a different basic swordsmanship move. Each move was the amalgamation of hundreds and thousands of figures. They were all the masterpieces of that move, as if they contained all the mysteries of that move. However, it was difficult for the 9 figures to gather together. There seemed to be a resistance that prevented Chen Zong from doing so. Then, let's leave it at that for now. In Chen Zong's eyes, an extremely sharp sword radiance shot out. The sword completely left the fingers of his left hand and streaked across the sky, creating layers of ripples as if the sword was cutting across the water. Slow. Everything slowed down in an instant. It was as if time had been affected. Space was the same. There was a feeling of sluggishness. Chen Zong's eyes became brighter. At this moment, he suddenly had a kind of enlightenment. It was a kind of unique enlightenment. It was the enlightenment of time and space, but more importantly, it was the enlightenment of sword principle. Superb swordsmanship, and even sword principle could affect time and space. This was what Chen Zong had deduced from some of the words of the sword-grinding mountain lord. Swordsmanship at the supreme realm could affect time and space with sword principle without comprehending the time Tao and space Tao. Chen Zong himself did not expect that the 10th sword after the 9 swords would fuse all the comprehensions he had gained so far into one. It could already achieve some of the power of a supreme sword technique, causing the surrounding time and space to be slightly affected. This effect was actually not strong, just a slight delay. But for now it was enough. Yu Feilong had already turned around. He found that he was no match for Chen Zong. He had used up a lot of his bloodline power. He could not activate his bloodline power in a short time unless he burned it with all his might. As for his other trump cards, to be honest, he now had the combat strength of a heaven stage transcendent. There were very few trump cards that could increase his strength, unless it was something that was refined by a saint stage powerhouse with great effort. However, such a treasure would not be able to provide any boost to a saint rank expert, and it just so happened that it was not easy to refine. Thus, saint rank experts were not willing to do such a time-consuming and laborious task. Even if they did, it was only a minority. Because of this, when one became stronger, the help from external forces would become less and less. After all, external forces were limited, while one's own potential was infinite. Run. Yu Feilong didn't hesitate to turn and flee. His speed was extremely fast, he was afraid. The words he spoke earlier were still ringing in his ears. Back then, he wanted to kill Chen Zong. But now, not only was he unable to do so, his life was also in danger. Yu Feilong burst out with extreme speed. He seemed to have turned into a flying dragon and flew away. In the blink of an eye, the distance between him and Chen Zong increased from 1,000 meters to 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 4,000 meters, 5,000 meters. Yu Feilong fled with all his strength. The other spectators were all dumbfounded. What happened? They couldn't understand what was going on. Wasn't Yu Feilong the one who had the upper hand at the beginning and was suppressing Chen Zong? Chen Zong even seemed to have been killed by Yu Feilong's attack. Who would have thought that the situation would change completely? Now, it was Yu Feilong's turn to be suppressed by Chen Zong and even wanted to escape. What were the two of them doing? Did they do it on purpose? They thought it was impossible. After all, they were fighting with all their might. Yu Feilong spat out blood as if it was water. If they did it on purpose, it would be too cruel to themselves. Yu Feilong fled quickly. Chen Zong did not chase him, but his eyes were locked on him. There was no difference between 5,000 meters and 1,000 meters. Yu Feilong could not disappear from Chen Zong's eyes. Countless mysteries flowed in Chen Zong's mind. The mysteries of the One Heart Sutra and all the mysteries of the sword art. Using the profoundness of the One Heart Sutra to control the profoundness and power of his swordsmanship, this was the inspiration that Chen Zong had just released. The One Heart Sutra and the realm of returning to truth were incomparably mysterious. All the mysteries of the One Heart Sutra could be controlled and controlled. When the sword sliced through the air like ripples on water, Chen Zong's wrist that was holding the sword suddenly slashed out horizontally. Under this slash, ripples appeared, and the ripples were endless. A faint sword light also slashed out. Slow. In everyone's eyes, this sword light was so slow, like a snail dragging its shell and crawling slowly. However, this was not really slow, but a kind of contrast that appeared when the speed was extremely fast. In fact, it was incomparably fast, surpassing everything. The distance between Yu Feilong and Chen Zong was more than 7,000 meters. It was a long distance. With Yu Feilong's speed, it would not be easy for Chen Zong to catch up with him at full speed. However, this slash seemed to have crossed the distance of 7,000 meters. At first, everything became slow, but it did not last long. It only lasted for a moment, and then it recovered. When everyone looked at it, the sword light had disappeared. Almost at the same time Chen Zong slashed his sword, Yu Feilong was hit. Fast. It was really too fast. It was indescribably fast. It surpassed everything. Even if it was only for a moment, it was already enough. Yu Feilong didn't even have time to react before he was struck by the sword. The sword light swept through everything in its path like a hot knife through butter. Yu Feilong's powerful physique couldn't withstand it at all. In front of this sword light, he was as weak as tofu. The sword chi entered his body and began to wreak havoc. It destroyed Yu Feilong's body and destroyed his strength. Yu Feilong's complexion suddenly turned deathly pale. His body trembled. The sword chi wreaking havoc in his body was extremely terrifying. It was incomparably condensed and gave off an indestructible feeling. He could not do anything about it. If this continued, his cultivation would be destroyed. When that time came, his cultivation would be crippled. Thinking of the consequences, Yu Feilong broke out in cold sweat. It wasn't easy for him to obtain his cultivation, and he absolutely couldn't let it be abolished. Since that was the case, he could only burst out with his life-saving trump card. He had paid a huge price to obtain that trump card, and it wasn't easy. He actually didn't want to use it, because that trump card was enough to save his life when facing an invincible heaven-rank powerhouse. But now, he had to use it. A ball the size of an egg appeared in Yu Feilong's hand. The ball was completely golden, but it was somewhat dim. It seemed to be a heavy dark golden color. It was ancient and deep, and seemed to radiate an indescribable fluctuation of supreme power. Lines appeared on the surface of the dark golden ball, crisscrossing with each other, appearing extremely complicated. A trace of pain flashed on Yu Feilong's face. He unhesitatingly tightened his grip. In an instant, the dark golden sphere shook and emitted strands of light that covered Yu Feilong's body. The dark golden divine runes covered his entire body, and a strand of energy entered his body. It shattered Chen Zong's tempered quasi-supreme sword realm sword chi and prevented Yu Feilong from having his cultivation crippled. The dark golden divine runes kept revolving around Yu Feilong's body. Burst! Yu Feilong's speed exploded in an instant. It increased by more than 2 times. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. Chen Zong's eyes narrowed slightly. The speed was too fast and he couldn't catch up with him. but it didn't matter. This battle had allowed him to fully unleash and truly master all the potential of the new realm of basic sword skills. He had raised his own sword skills to the quasi-supreme level. He had also used Yufeilong as a sword test stone to continuously sharpen and integrate with his own sword skills to evolve an even more powerful sword skill. The 10th sword just now was the embryonic form of the new sword skill. Although he hadn't fully mastered it, it was an excellent start. In the future, he only needed to continue to comprehend it. Even if there were any deviations, he could correct them in time. This sword skill will be led by the Heart Sutra. It will control all the mysteries of sword skills. In this way, it will be called the Heart Sword Skill, Chunzong said to himself. From then on, the name of the new sword skill was decided by Chunzong. In the future, it would be continuously comprehending, sharpening, perfecting and upgrading until it reached the limit. No, there was no limit to the sword. It was the same for sword skills. Chapter 2949. On the same day, 2 people successfully left their names on the Sealed Sky Ancient City. The news spread like a storm from the Sealed Sky Ancient City, spreading in all directions. Soon, it swept across the Sealed Sky Ancient region, and then out of the region. The second piece of news was that 2 experts who had left their names on the Sealed Sky Ancient City had started fighting in the Sealed Sky Ancient City. One of them was Yufeilong, the Flying Dragon Sword. He was a peerless genius from the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land, one of the 3 holy lands of the Sealed Sky Ancient City. He was a transcendent expert with the bloodline of a 15-clawed flying dragon of the heaven grade. The other person, according to the Taishan theory, was a young man who had lived for hundreds of years and called himself Chunzong. But now, Chunzong was no longer Jiandi, but Jiandi who had left his name on the Sealed Sky Ancient City. At the beginning, Chunzong was the one who called himself Jiandi, but now, Jiandi who had left his name on the Sealed Sky Ancient City was the one who called himself Jiandi. The meaning was completely different. This was the recognition of the Sealed Sky Ancient City, which was equivalent to the recognition of the Great Path Will. If even the Great Path Will recognized him, what was the point of saying that he didn't recognize him? There was no point in arguing. Chunzong didn't leave the Sealed Sky Ancient City. Instead, he rented a cultivation room in the city to strike while the iron was hot. He continued to comprehend and cultivate the single-hearted sword art. The single-hearted sword art was just a prototype. It didn't even have a complete move, but it had already displayed amazing power. Chunzong still had many inspirations in his mind. He had to seize this opportunity to strengthen his comprehension and continue to improve. As for the consequences of this battle, Chunzong didn't think about it. In the depths of the Sealed Sky Ancient City, a pair of extremely deep eyes suddenly opened. They became incomparably clear, as if reflecting 2 figures. The 2 figures were fighting fiercely until only one was left. That figure held his sword horizontally in the sky, as if drawing out the void as a scabbard. Then, with a twist of his wrist, he slashed horizontally. Every movement was so clear. If Chunzong was here to see it, he would definitely be shocked. This scene was the scene of him and Yufeilong fighting fiercely. The one who had slashed was himself. What astonishing talent in the sword Dao! A sigh could not help but be heard. It sounded like a low murmur. I've only been asleep for 100 years. Perhaps when I truly awaken, there will be another saint in this world. The ancient Phoenix domain was Chunzong's first stop when he arrived at the ancient mystic world of the inner universe. Chunzong was also here. He had initially spread the name of the unparalleled sword. Originally, he was regarded as a proud son of heaven, or even a top proud son of heaven. However, when the Taishan strategy appeared, it revealed that Chunzong had lived for hundreds of years. This caused Chunzong to lose his title as a proud son of heaven. But Chunzong didn't care. He only needed to spread the word of unparalleled sword Chen Zong. After that, he first defeated the Bailey clan's proud son of heaven, shocking sword Bailey Wun. Then, he crippled 4 top final realm warriors of the Daluo Palace's Tianluo Palace. This made Chen Zong's name even more shocking. However, Chen Zong left the ancient Phoenix domain and entered the sealed heaven ancient region. He continued his path of challenges and continued to spread the name of the unparalleled sword. Now, he had left his name on the sealed heaven monument. Leaving his name on the sealed heaven monument was the recognition of the ancient mystic world's great path will. It recognized Chen Zong's name and turned it into a title. Unparalleled Jiandi. Yi Tianfeng was drinking when he heard the news. He immediately choked on his drink. His face was full of shock. He thought he was hallucinating. Could it really be the same person? It was true that people with the same name had the same surname. However, the unparalleled Jiandi Chen Zong and the unparalleled sword Chen Zong were the same person. In addition, other news indicated that the unparalleled Jiandi Chen Zong had gone to the sealed heaven ancient region from the ancient Phoenix domain. It was confirmed. It was the same person. Shock and astonishment played out in the ancient Phoenix domain. When they heard the news, their first reaction was disbelief. Their second reaction was extreme shock. How could it be? He was clearly a cultivator who was rated as a genius by the mysterious tactic. Moreover, he was an old man who had cultivated for several hundred years. How could he have such ability and strength? It should be known that since ancient times, there had never been a case of someone who was several hundred years old leaving their name on the sealed heaven monument. Basically, those who could leave their name were all peerless geniuses or even monstrous geniuses. Geniuses, top geniuses, and the majority of peerless geniuses could not leave their name on the monument. Why? Chen Zong, an old man who had lived for several hundred years, how could he leave his name on the sealed heaven monument? At first, everyone did not believe it. Then they were shocked. Then they were puzzled and doubtful. The mysterious tactics was so authoritative that it had never been wrong. However, Chen Zong had made a mistake. The ancient Phoenix divine maiden naturally also received the news. Her eyes were full of shock. Impossible, it must be someone else with the same name. The maid on the right immediately shrieked, because she looked down on Chen Zong. How could an old man who had lived for several hundred years be like this? Among the ardent Phoenix guards, especially the 6 ardent Phoenix guards who had seen Chen Zong before, they were even more in disbelief. No wonder he rejected my recruitment, the ancient Phoenix divine maiden secretly said. Is this where your confidence lies? Indeed, being able to leave one's name on the sealed heaven monument in itself represented a shocking achievement. It was not just fame but also strength. In the future, the possibility of becoming a saint-level powerhouse was greater. Even if they could not break through to become a saint-level powerhouse, they still had hope of becoming an invincible heaven-level powerhouse. Even if they could not become an invincible heaven-level powerhouse, they were still at the top level of the ultra-level. All in all, leaving one's name on the sealed heaven monument was very shocking. The ancient Phoenix divine maiden herself had also left her name on the sealed heaven monument. She deeply knew how difficult it was to leave one's name on the sealed heaven monument. In the sealed heaven ancient city, there were powerhouses who specially built some cultivation rooms for the cultivators who came to the sealed heaven ancient city to rent and cultivate. They only needed to pay mystic coins. Mystic coins were money. What was the point of earning money? Naturally, it was to make the best use of everything to make a better life for oneself. In the cultivation room, Chen Zong stood quietly with a sword in one hand. In front of him, there was also a figure standing. That figure was blurry, but the sword in his hand was very clear. There was a formation in the cultivation room that could condense illusions to act as opponent. According to the amount of mystic coins paid, the strength of the illusions would also be divided. The illusions Chen Zong chose were naturally at the level of the ultra level. This was also the strongest illusions that the formation here could create. The consumption of such illusions was shocking. To maintain it for a day, it would cost 100,000 mystic coins. Chen Zong sold many treasures. In addition to the other mystic coins, it was only a little more than 1,000,000 mystic coins. It could only be maintained for a dozen or so days, but Chen Zong did not feel the slightest bit of reluctance. Money was something that only had meaning when used in the right place. Otherwise, if one was a miser who guarded a pile of wealth but did not know how to turn it into strength, in the end, it would become the spoils of war of others. Once the mystic coins were used up, one could obtain more, as long as one was strong enough. With the ultra-level sword cultivator illusions as opponents, Chen Zong only used his swordsmanship to fight. Every time he used his swordsmanship, it was a form of training. Every time he used his swordsmanship, it was a form of refinement. Every refinement was a form of improvement. A powerful and suitable opponent was indeed more than 10 times better than simply cultivating in seclusion. Chen Zong's single-hearted sword technique was constantly being refined. Time slowly passed. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, Chen Zong fought continuously. After a period of time, he stopped and pondered. He practiced his swordsmanship for a while before continuing to fight. As for the sword cultivator illusions in the formation, as long as one did not attack them, they would not take the initiative to attack. It was a good opportunity for one to comprehend and cultivate. The mysteries of the heart swordsmanship and the world swordsmanship were constantly integrated into the single-hearted sword technique. The single-hearted sword technique was a quasi-supreme swordsmanship derived from the quasi-supreme swordsmanship. It had the amazing potential to transform into a supreme swordsmanship. However, Chen Zong needed to constantly perfect it. Chen Zong had also figured out the so-called method of perfection. It was to fill in. The single-hearted sword technique was like a framework and also like a foundation. It was constantly filling in the mysteries and essences of other swordsmanships, constantly perfecting and improving it. It was like building a house on a solid foundation. The mysteries and essences of other swordsmanships were like bricks, tiles, and even decorations. However, it was not easy for Chen Zong to integrate the mysteries and essences of other swordsmanship. It required a process and also a link. He could not stuff everything in at once. It would only be a mess and become chaotic. Not only would he not be able to perfect the swordsmanship, but he would also destroy it. After trying again and again, Chen Zong gradually found the trick, the method, and the pattern. The first thing he integrated was the mysteries and essences of the heart swordsmanship and the world swordsmanship. One focused on sharpness, transformation, and the other focused on strength and suppression. On the 10th day, Chen Zong woke up from his meditation. He opened his eyes, and a ray of light shot out from them. It pierced through the void and stared at the blurry figure standing still 10 meters away. The only clear thing was the long sword in the figure's hand, which reflected a dazzling cold light. When the figure stood still, the power it consumed was insignificant. However, if it moved, the power it consumed was 1,000 times more. Chen Zong slowly stood up and silently stared at the sword cultivator illusion. In the next breath, he moved. He unsheathed his sword. The will heavenly sword was unsheathed in an instant and drew a beautiful arc. It seemed to be stabbing forward, but also seemed to be cutting forward, and also seemed to be slashing forward. All in all, it looked like an ordinary sword. There was nothing special about it, except that it felt natural and smooth. It was a little pleasing to the eye. This movement of the sword did not seem to contain much power. It was as if it was just a casual movement. Only Chen Zong himself knew how terrifying the power contained in it was. This sword had integrated the mysteries and essences of the heart swordsmanship and the world swordsmanship. It also condensed his own power to the limit. Only this sword had condensed all the power into one and was extremely powerful. The sword light broke through the void. The figure of the swordsman sensed it and reacted in an instant. His figure flashed and the long sword in his hand burst out cold light, shining in all directions. Then he became one with the sword and swung it up, drawing circles one after another. They overlapped like endless ripples and turned into a vortex. However, under Chen Zong's sword, the circles were directly shattered. In the next moment, the swordsman's phantom was also directly killed. Chapter 2950. High up in the sky, Chen Zong flew on his sword, quickly leaving Sealing Sky Ancient City. 10 days of cultivation had consumed 1,000,000 cultivation coins. The price was not small, but the cultivation coins were earned quickly. Therefore, Chen Zong did not feel any heartache at all. If it was accumulated painstakingly, the feeling in his heart might be different. Moreover, after 10 days of consumption of 1,000,000 cultivation coins, the single-hearted sword technique was finally on the right track. It was no longer in its embryonic form. The power of that sword was astonishing. Another point was that his cultivation had broken through, from the peak of the heaven realm to the peak of the heaven realm. His cultivation strength had increased, and his combat strength had increased again. To be honest, Chen Zong did not know how strong his combat strength was now. He needed to verify it. Anyway, ordinary surpassing realm experts were not his opponent. He could easily defeat them. As for killing them, it would not be that easy. Which heaven realm surpassing realm expert did not have outstanding combat strength? Which one of them did not have life-saving methods? Flying on his sword was extremely fast, at least twice as fast as before. Moreover, Chen Zong was still increasing his speed. He was even more excited, because he heard news about Yunyanxin. Yes, so suddenly, so unexpectedly, he heard news about Yunyanxin. What was Chen Zong's purpose in coming here? He was used to keeping a low profile. Why did he go around challenging people and spreading the name of the unparalleled sword? Everything was to find Yunyanxin. If Yunyanxin was really in the ancient profound world, she would definitely hear news about the unparalleled sword and the unparalleled Jiandi Chen Zong. She would come to find him. At the very least, she would spread the news to let him know. Chen Zong did not know how long it would take for him to find Yunyanxin. He might not even be able to find her here. Unexpectedly, after 10 days of seclusion, he received news. This news was sent to him by Hu Ji. At the ancient Phoenix Domain's Heavenly Phoenix City Lord Mansion's Phoenix Morning Banquet, Chen Zong had once said that he was looking for his Dao companion and wife. Her name was Yunyanxin. As Chen Zong became famous throughout the world, Yunyanxin naturally became known to more and more people. In fact, there were even people who were secretly looking for him. Unfortunately, they were unable to find him. When the news of Chen Zong successfully leaving his name on the sealed sky monument spread, Yunyanxin's name was mentioned and remembered by more and more people. Many people searched for Yunyanxin. If they found her, it would be a favor to Chen Zong. The favor of the powerhouse who left his name on the heaven sealing monument was naturally not small. Hu Ji passed the news to Chen Zong. She also said that she had heard it by accident. However, she was not sure if it was the person Chen Zong was looking for. After all, having the same name did not mean anything. Only by seeing the person in person could one be sure. However, whether it was true or not, Chen Zong had to see it with his own eyes. For the 3 words Yunyanxin, Butterfly Valley. According to the information provided by Hu Ji, the place where Yunyanxin lived was Butterfly Valley, an earth-grade force in the Fengtian ancient region. It was not considered powerful, and the strength of Butterfly Valley's Valley Master was only at the final realm. He had lived for hundreds of years before he had obtained a great opportunity and inheritance, and had barely broken through to the final realm. In the past, he could barely be regarded as a heaven's chosen realm expert. There were not many disciples in Butterfly Valley. At most, there were only a few hundred disciples. There were less than 100 Heaven Realm disciples. As for those at the Extreme Realm, there were less than 10. No matter what, Chernzong had to personally rush over to see if it was really Yunyanxin. If it was just someone with the same name, it would be nothing more than a trip. Fortunately, Chernzong was planning to leave Sealed Sky Ancient City and head to other places. Going to Butterfly Valley now was not a big deal. If it was true, then everyone would be happy. His wish of many years would be fulfilled. How great would that be? As he thought about it, Chernzong's speed became faster and faster. The sword light streaked across the sky. As for whether the news was fake, Chernzong did not think too much about it. Although he was not very familiar with Hu Ji, after several interactions, Chernzong was sure that she did not have any enmity or malice towards him. She had followed him because she wanted to find out the secret of how to stay young after living for several hundred years. However, there was no secret. She was born this way. In other words, it was a unique talent of cultivators in the outer universe. After that, Hu Ji had provided him with the news that the Khanate Holy Lotus was about to be born. Although Chernzong did not plan to join in the fun, he still went there by chance. After all, it was a gift from Hu Ji. Now that Hu Ji had sent him the news, Chernzong was somewhat grateful. If he really found Yunyanxin this time, he would definitely repay Hu Ji. Even if it was the Fiend God sword technique, he would also teach it to her. Even if it was a sword technique that he had comprehended himself, he would also teach it to her. All in all, if he really found Yunyanxin, Chernzong was willing to pay a high price to repay her. Afraid. He was afraid that he would not be able to find her and would have made a wasted trip. Finally, he arrived at Butterfly Valley. Before he entered the valley, Chernzong could already smell the fragrance of flowers. He did not barge in directly. Instead, he landed outside Butterfly Valley and appeared in front of the two disciples guarding the valley entrance. "Gentlemen, I am Wushuang Jiandi Chernzong. I am here to visit the Valley Master. Please inform him of my arrival," Chernzong said calmly. The two disciples guarding the valley entrance were not at the heaven stage. They were only at the earth stage. In the ancient mystic world, as long as one was willing to cultivate, it was not difficult to reach the earth stage. As for the heaven stage, it did require a bit of talent and luck. When they heard Chernzong revealing his identity, the two disciples were first stunned. Then, their expressions changed drastically. They were shocked beyond words. Wushuang Jiandi Chernzong. Wasn't this the master who had left his name on the Sealed Sky monument? Why was he here? However, they did not dare to be negligent. They hurriedly welcomed Chernzong into the valley, while the other quickly went to find the valley master. Oh my God, Wushuang Jiandi. That was the Wushuang Jiandi who had left his name on the Sealed Sky monument. He even defeated the flying dragon celestial sword, Yu Feilong, who had also left his name on the Sealed Sky monument. His reputation was amazing. But then, Chernzong was a little surprised. Logically speaking, he was the Wushuang Jiandi, a heaven stage master who had left his name on the Sealed Sky monument. He was at least at the super extreme stage, while the Valley Master of Butterfly Valley was only at the final extreme stage. There was a huge gap between their strength and reputation. However, no one came to greet him. Even Chernzong felt that Butterfly Valley was a little cold. There were only flowers blooming and butterflies of different colors flying, but it lacked a bit of liveliness. However, this had nothing to do with Chernzong. The purpose of this trip was to find Yunyanxin and confirm if she was his Nianxin. That was all. The Valley Master is waiting inside. The disciple who led the way led Chernzong to the front of the main hall of Butterfly Valley and pointed inside. Chernzong nodded and said, "Thank you for your trouble." Then, he strode into the main hall. However, there was no one in the main hall. The decorations were pretty good. There were many patterns of butterflies, vivid and lifelike. It looked like thousands of butterflies were dancing in the air. It was pleasing to the eye. Butterfly Valley is honored by the presence of Wushuang Jiandi. A soft voice sounded, accompanied by a delicate fragrance. It was like the fragrance of 100 flowers. I am even more honored. Valley Master, you are too polite. Chernzong turned around and bowed. Although the other party's strength was not as strong as his, she was still the Valley Master. Moreover, he came here to ask for her help. Naturally, he had to be polite. Chernzong is here to ask about something from the Valley Master. Jiandi, don't be in such a hurry. Let me entertain you properly before we talk. The Butterfly Valley Master's footsteps were light. Her figure was extremely lithe. As the colorful clothes on her body fluttered, she looked like a colorful butterfly fluttering in the air. Waves of delicate fragrance filled the air. It was as if Chernzong was a fresh flower. She looked like she was throwing herself at him. Chernzong's footsteps shifted slightly, and he naturally avoided the Butterfly Valley Master's action of throwing herself at him. There is no need to trouble the Valley Master. Chernzong smiled naturally and said, I will leave once I am done with my business. Then, without giving the Butterfly Valley Master a chance to continue speaking, Chernzong immediately said, I heard that there is a person named Yunyanxin in Butterfly Valley. Valley Master, please call him over so that Chernzong can take a look at him and see if he is an old friend of mine. Yunyanxin? The Butterfly Valley Master's eyes twinkled. She smiled gently and said, I am him. Valley Master, please don't joke with me like this. The smile on Chernzong's face instantly disappeared. His expression turned serious as he said this. I am not joking with Jiandi. The Butterfly Valley Master smiled again. Her eyes were as charming as water. As long as Jiandi is willing, I can be anyone. It seems that there is no such person as Yunyanxin in Butterfly Valley. Chernzong frowned slightly and said, If that is the case, I have disturbed you. Goodbye. Since there was no such person as Yunyanxin, Chernzong did not plan to stay any longer. Of course, there could also be someone named Yunyanxin. However, the Butterfly Valley Master did not seem to want to answer his question. Whether there was such a person or not, then he would have to investigate himself and search the entire Butterfly Valley. Why are you in such a hurry, Jiandi? Why don't you stay and have some fun with me? The Butterfly Valley Master's charming voice sounded again. Her voice seemed to ripple and hit the depths of one's heart. For no reason, Chernzong felt a burning sensation spread out from the depths of his body. It flowed like a stream and filled his entire body. Gradually, his extremely powerful qi and blood became restless. It was as if it was boiling. In just an instant, Chernzong felt that something was wrong. According to his ability, such a situation should not have happened. However, it happened now. It meant that there was a problem. In just an instant, Chernzong connected it to the delicate fragrance from before. Under the wholehearted realm, Chernzong suppressed the restless heat. His entire body became clear again. His eyes were extremely sharp and flashed with a cold light as he stared at the Butterfly Valley Master. The Butterfly Valley Master's expression changed drastically. Her entire body trembled uncontrollably, and she felt a chill all over her body. It was as if a sharp sword had pierced through her body and spirit. The absolute difference in combat strength was a great suppression. This suppression was unbearable for the Butterfly Valley Master. She felt fear and trepidation in front of Chernzong. Chapter 2951. Retreat. The Master of the Butterfly Valley shrieked and let out an extremely terrifying sound wave. It charged towards Chernzong's head like a demonic sound, trying to shake Chernzong's soul. At the same time, she retreated in an instant. Her speed was extremely fast and light. Such a sharp shriek was a sound wave attack, but it was unable to shake Chernzong's will at all. This was because Chernzong's will was extremely powerful and terrifying. It was not something that the master of the Butterfly Valley could shake, even when Chen Zong was not on guard. Chen Zong took a step forward. His body was like a phantom as he directly crossed over. He reached out with one hand, and his 5 fingers sealed off all of the master of the Butterfly Valley's escape routes. He was even faster than the master of the Butterfly Valley. He reached out with his hand even though he had moved later. The master of the Butterfly Valley's expression changed drastically. She was extremely shocked. She unleashed her movement technique to the extreme without holding back. She was like a fluttering butterfly, but she was unable to escape from the range of Chen Zong's 5 fingers. Sealed. Everything was sealed, and it was constantly being suppressed. The 5 fingers seemed to have become huge, like the 5 fingers of a giant pressing down on the Butterfly Valley Master. The astonishing pressure caused the Butterfly Valley Master to tremble uncontrollably. Even her divine soul was trembling. This was the gap between them. It was a huge gap between their battle prowess and their cultivation levels. Under the 5 fingers, the master of the Butterfly Valley was unable to dodge at all. She was directly caught. Chen Zong grabbed her by the neck and lifted her up. Her entire body trembled like a fish struggling on its deathbed. However, she was unable to escape from Chen Zong's 5 fingers. The master of the Butterfly Valley was unable to speak. Her watery eyes were filled with pleading, as if they could speak. She was pleading for Chen Zong to let her go and not kill her. Chen Zong had no intention of killing her. Even now, Chen Zong was still deeply afraid of the sword-grinding mountain lord's soul within the black mark. He would not give it any chance if he could. He released his 5 fingers and the master of the Butterfly Valley fell to the ground. She coughed violently, and her face was ghastly pale. "Tell me, who asked you to do it?" Chen Zong looked down at him with cold eyes. He did not know the Butterfly Valley Master, nor did he have any conflict with her. It was impossible for her to deal with him. Then, there was only one explanation. Someone had asked her to do this to deal with him. Otherwise, how could a mere Butterfly Valley, whose strongest cultivator was only at the peak of the high extremity, dare to make an enemy out of him? Peerless Jiandi. Wushuang Jiandi, who had left his name on the sealed sky monument, had even defeated Yu Feilong, the flying dragon's celestial sword, who was at the level of a transcendent. It was hard to imagine just how terrifying his strength was. He was at least at the level of a transcendent. In that case, what kind of role did Hu Ji play in this incident? She only heard some news, so she told him that she didn't know the details herself. Or did they know the reason behind it, but still told him that they were involved in this operation against him? Hu Ji wasn't here, so Chen Zong didn't know. He couldn't make an accurate judgment at the moment. But now, he had to figure out what was going on. No. No one asked me to do it. The Butterfly Valley Master coughed and said intermittently. What about Yun Yanxin? Where is he? Chen Zong did not continue to ask this question, nor did he refute the other party. Instead, he asked another question, which caught the Butterfly Valley Master off guard. Under normal circumstances, after the Butterfly Valley Master answered like this, she would be suspected of lying, and further interrogated. However, Chen Zong did not do that. He directly changed the question. As he asked that question, Chen Zong unleashed a strand of sword intent. The extremely powerful sword intent directly slammed into the master of the Butterfly Valley, causing her soul to tremble. Her entire body trembled as well. She was extremely frightened. No, this person. The Butterfly Valley Master's mind was almost blank under the terrifying sword essence that was mixed with extreme killing intent. She couldn't continue to lie and could only answer intermittently. Chen Zong's expression became colder and colder. I'll give you one last chance. Who asked you to do this? Chen Zong's expression became even colder, and his tone became even colder. After thinking about it, she couldn't think of anyone who wanted to do this to her. Was it the ancient Phoenix Domain's Bailey clan? or the ancient Phoenix Domains Daluo Palace, or the heavenly dragon Holy Land where Yu Filong was. It seemed possible, but other than that, other possibilities couldn't be ruled out. There were many possibilities. Without enough evidence, it was difficult to make a judgment. I can't say. If I say it, everyone in Butterfly Valley will die. The Butterfly Valley Master didn't dare to say it, but her words directly revealed that someone really wanted to do something to her. Chenzong turned around and looked outside the hall. After looking around, he opened his mouth and spoke. His voice was clear, and it carried the clanging of swords as it reverberated. Since you've been scheming to deal with me, there's no way you're not in Butterfly Valley, right? Otherwise, you're too naive if you think you can deal with me with just Butterfly Valley. Come out, you rats hiding in the shadows. Just as Chenzong's voice fell, Chenzong immediately felt auras appear one after another. It was as if they had been detonated and directly exploded. Every aura was very tyrannical and surged into the sky. It was at the level of the final realm. Some of them were even at the peak of the final realm. Some of them were even at the peak of the final realm. In an instant, Chenzong knew that there were dozens of Heaven Stage Final Realm powerhouses in Butterfly Valley. The Butterfly Valley Master was only at the peak of the Final Realm. How could there be dozens of Final Realm powerhouses in Butterfly Valley? It was obvious that they were here to deal with Chenzong. The total number of Final Realm powerhouses who had erupted with auras reached 64. Chenzong could clearly sense that 8 of them were at the peak of the Final Realm, and the remaining 56 were at the peak of the Final Realm. Moreover, according to the direction of their auras, he could sense that they were scattered and very orderly. A formation. Chenzong immediately thought that it was a formation. Without hesitation, Chenzong immediately burst out with extreme speed and rushed out of the hall in an instant, flying out of Butterfly Valley. However, the moment Chenzong rushed out of the hall, a golden sword light tore through the sky and arrived in an instant. Its power was extremely tyrannical, and it was at the level of the surpassing realm. Chenzong dodged the attack of the sword light with a flash of his figure. However, several sword lights came from all directions and directly surrounded Chenzong. In just an instant, Chenzong's speed was restrained and his figure was delayed. The formation was activated. The 64 auras of the greater extremity erupted in an instant and soared into the sky as if they were about to shatter the vacuum. They then connected with each other and intersected with each other. It was as if they had formed an invisible net that enveloped Chenzong. As for the few surpassing realm powerhouses who had released the sword light, they all retreated the moment the formation was activated. Chenzong acutely sensed that his surroundings had been sealed by a tyrannical aura. He looked at the originally blue sky, but at this moment it was somewhat gray and blurred. Even the originally lively and rich vitality in the surroundings had begun to become chaotic and turbid. It felt as if a pool of clear water had been directly changed into turbid water. The change was so great and so fast that even Chenzong, who had an amazing ability to adapt, felt uncomfortable. The chaotic and turbid aura continued to become denser as time passed. As it became denser, the surroundings became more and more blurred. Even Chenzong began to feel that the aura of the Great Path was also affected, becoming thinner, blurrier, and more chaotic. Under such circumstances, his strength was greatly affected and could not be fully displayed. Chenzong could not help but look solemn. This was a deliberate plan to deal with him. He did not know how much time they had spent preparing. Chenzong finally understood why these people did not directly come to the ancient sealed sky city to look for him. Apart from the fact that fighting was not allowed in the ancient sealed sky city, it was probably because setting up such a formation would require a lot of time and effort and a lot of preparation. Since that was the case, they might as well find a way to lure him over and lure him into a trap. If it were for any other reason, Chenzong would most likely not be fooled. However, this was related to Yunyenshin, so Chernzong came without hesitation. It was not that Chernzong did not consider that this trip might be disappointing and that he might meet someone with the same name. However, he did not expect that not only was there no Yunyenshin, but it was also a big trap. A big trap deliberately set up to deal with him. Chernzong admitted that this time he had indeed been careless. However, even if he did it again, it would be the same. Because his goal was originally to find Nianshin. If he could not find her, he would continue to search. If there was news, regardless of whether it was true or false, he would go and verify it. False, 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 there would always be a time when it would be true. Of course, after this time, Chernzong would not be so reckless. So now it was better to get through this crisis first. If he could not, then there was no need to talk about it in the future. Although surrounded by the formation, Chernzong did not panic at all. This was a confidence brought about by his great strength. Chernzong, this is the all-directional turbid gas concealing formation that we spent half a month to prepare for you. The characteristic of this formation is that it will release turbid gas and pollute the pneuma, making it difficult for the pneuma to be absorbed. Moreover, the longer you stay in the turbid gas, the more obvious the pollution of your cultivation strength will be, making it difficult for you to really exert your cultivation strength. A laughing voice suddenly sounded as if it came from all directions, making Chernzong unable to determine the specific direction. Second, once this formation is activated, it will gradually cover the Great Way, making it more difficult for you to sense the mystery of the Great Way, and your strength will be greatly reduced. It had to be said that this all-directional turbid gas concealing formation was really a terrifying formation. Being in the formation, one's strength would be constantly weakened. As time passed, the weakening would become more and more serious. In the end, one would be at the mercy of others. At this moment, not only was Chernzong in the all-directional turbid gas concealing formation, but the Valley Master of Butterfly Valley was also in it. Feeling her cultivation strength being invaded by the turbid gas and beginning to pollute it, the Valley Master of Butterfly Valley's expression changed greatly. She was not Chernzong and did not have such strong resistance. Chapter 29:52. Let me out. The Butterfly Valley Master's face turned pale and panicked. You promised me. When we take down Chernzong, we will naturally let you out. A fleeting voice sounded, making the Butterfly Valley Master feel despair. She had been promised all kinds of benefits and saw the possibility of breaking her shackles and advancing to the transcendent realm. That was why she had helped these people deal with Chernzong. After all, Chernzong was the unparalleled Jiendi who had left his name on the sealed sky monument. He had the battle prowess of a transcendent realm expert. Offending such a person was definitely not a wise decision. However, it had been hundreds of years, and the upper limit was the peak of the final realm. There was no hope of reaching the limit, let alone the transcendent realm. Once there was hope of breaking through, they were willing to pay any price for it. But now, the Butterfly Valley Master felt like she had been betrayed. Chernzong ignored the Butterfly Valley Master. This person posed no threat to Chernzong. Even if they were under the turbid gas concealing formation, the Butterfly Valley Master could not pose any threat to Chernzong. The turbid gas surged like turbid waves, crashing over wave after wave. It became more and more intense, constantly rushing into Chernzong's body. There was no way to block it. It eroded Chernzong's cultivation power, causing the extremely pure power to become turbid. It became heavy and sluggish, gradually slipping out of control. It was difficult to mobilize, and it was difficult to unleash the power it should have. The great path was gradually covered up and became thin. It was even more difficult to mobilize. This was the disadvantage of not reaching the saint level. Because once one broke through to the saint level, they would be able to control the great path and would not be restricted like this. Such a large formation was truly extremely mysterious and astonishing. Its power was incomparably terrifying. However, it was also not easy to set it up. At the very least, it took half a month to set it up in advance and bury the foundation of the formation. Furthermore, it was necessary to find a suitable place. In other words, a suitable environment. It was not a place that could be set up casually. There were requirements. It just so happened that the terrain and other aspects of Butterfly Valley barely met the requirement. That was why Chernzong was lured to Butterfly Valley. Otherwise, it would not have taken so much time and effort. Now it was time to reap the rewards. Because Chernzong was inside the formation, they did not need to do anything. They only needed to maintain the formation. Soon, Chernzong would not be able to unleash his full strength and would be easily suppressed and captured alive. Chernzong, Chernzong said. Chernzong zong. He zong zong. Chernzong, it's only been a short period of time. Have you already forgotten me? A cold laugh rang out. It sounded so familiar. Chernzong frowned slightly. He finally understood that Yu Feilong had brought people to deal with him. In that case, the heavenly dragon Holy Land had come to deal with him. The people of a Holy Land had specially set up a large array to deal with him. If this news were to spread, it would be very shocking news. However, they did not only want to deal with Chernzong. They wanted to capture Chernzong alive and interrogate him. After all, Chernzong was someone who had lived for hundreds of years. He could be considered to be from the older generation, yet he was still able to maintain his youthful appearance and leave his name on the sky ceiling monument. His ability had also risen from the low extreme to the super extreme in such a short period of time. No matter how one looked at it, this gave people the feeling that there was a huge secret behind this. Who wouldn't be tempted? However, some people suppressed their temptations because they weren't confident, while others turned their temptations into actions. Time passed. A quarter of an hour had passed. Immediately, a figure appeared from the turbid chi. It was as if he had walked out of the fog. It was Yu Feilong. Yu Feilong was not affected by the turbid chi concealment formation. He was prepared. That was why he dared to step into the formation. He walked towards Chernzong because he believed in the power of the formation. After a quarter of an hour, Chernzong had been eroded by the power of the formation. He did not have much strength left. Yu Feilong's purpose was to beat Chernzong up. He wanted to take revenge on Chernzong for defeating him outside the sealed sky ancient city. Yu Feilong sneered. He looked like he was teasing Chernzong. He clasped the hilt of his sword and slowly pulled it out. A ray of light shot out. It was extremely sharp and dazzling. When the sword was unsheathed, a terrifying sword intent spread out and filled the surroundings. It became more and more tyrannical and directly suppressed Chernzong. This sword intent carried a monstrous sword momentum. It directly attacked Chernzong and suppressed Chernzong. Yu Feilong believed that under the influence and suppression of the turbid chi concealment formation, it would be good if Chernzong could retain 10% of his strength. How could he be a match for him? He would first suppress Chernzong, then beat him up until he was on the verge of death. As long as he did not kill Chernzong, he would capture him alive. The sword was completely unsheathed. It drew an arc of light and went straight forward, as if it had cut through the turbid chi. It went straight for Chernzong. Immediately, a golden ray of sword light pierced through the air, accompanied by a resounding dragon roar. The sword went straight for Chernzong's right arm. That was the arm that could hold the sword. Even with the turbid chi concealment formation, Yu Feilong was very cautious. He first destroyed Chernzong's right arm to further cut off any possibility of Chernzong's counterattack. However, that streak of sword light missed and was evaded by Chernzong. Struggle slowly. Yu Feilong was slightly startled at first, then he revealed a sinister smile. Chernzong could dodge it, which was a little unexpected, but it was still within his control. After all, Chernzong was an expert who had left his name on the sky-sealing monument. Although he was eroded by the turbid qi in this formation, he still retained some of his strength. He shook his arm and his wrist. With a light tap of the sword, golden rays of sword light pierced through the air like small golden dragons. There were dozens of them, all rushing toward Chernzong. Each ray of sword qi was extremely terrifying. They blocked all of Chernzong's escape routes, aiming to hit Chernzong. You shouldn't have come. In the face of dozens of golden rays of sword qi, Chernzong's expression did not change at all. Instead, he said softly, which made Yu Feilong feel uneasy for no reason. The strong uneasiness instantly exploded in his heart. Draw the sword. In an instant, Chernzong's right hand fell on the hilt of the sword. His 5 fingers gently clasped, and he instantly pulled it out. The mystery of the sword-drawing technique was integrated into this sword, and he directly swung it forward. It seemed like a straight stab, but also like a horizontal slash. The sword light also broke through the air in an instant. Single heart sword technique. It was just a simple sword move. It did not seem to carry much power, but it carried an extremely shocking power. When the sword was swung, it directly disappeared into the void. It had the sharpness of the heart sword technique, and also the forcefulness of the world sword technique. It was an extremely powerful sword move. It was also Chernzong's most powerful sword move. Its power was much stronger than the divine sword technique. Under this sword move, dozens of golden rays of sword qi were all destroyed. They could not resist at all. Yu Feilong's face was full of horror. He wanted to erupt with all of his strength, but he found that the sword light had already reached him. It was as if his thoughts and everything else had slowed down, and his reaction was one breath slower. He was hit by the sword. This attack directly defeated all of Yu Feilong's strength. The sword qi entered his body and wantonly destroyed it. In an instant, Yu Feilong's strength was completely destroyed. Then, he lost his resistance to the turbid aura concealment formation. A large amount of turbid aura seemed to have found a vent, and crazily invaded Yu Feilong's body, wantonly polluting his body. Screams. Yu Feilong wailed miserably. Invincible heaven rank. When did your strength reach the invincible heaven rank? Why aren't you affected by the formation? The 2 questions in a row revealed the confusion and panic in Yu Feilong's heart. The unforeseen event happened too quickly. Everyone thought that Chernzong had been corroded by the turbid aura of the formation, and that his strength should have been reduced to less than 10%. After all, this formation had been tested many times over the years, and it had never been wrong. Even an invincible heaven-rank genius would not be spared. Unless he had surpassed the invincible heaven rank, but that was related to the saint rank. Figures rushed out of the turbid aura in an instant. There were as many as 3 of them, and each of them had the battle strength of a transcendent realm expert. They were not young and had lived for at least a few hundred years. Each of them had an extremely tyrannical aura. Feilong. One of them, a middle-aged man who looked somewhat similar to Yu Feilong, rushed to Yu Feilong. He immediately took out a pill and stuffed it into Yu Feilong's mouth. At the same time, he channeled his own strength into Yu Feilong's body, helping him suppress the corrosion of the turbid aura and the destruction of the sword qi. Then, he accelerated the digestion of the pill and accelerated the absorption of the pill. The other 2 looked like old men, and their expressions were cold. They instantly rushed to Chernzong, one on the left and one on the right. Their sword light broke through the air. They did not know whether Chernzong was affected by the formation or not, but at this point, they had no choice but to take down Chernzong. As for the invincible heaven rank, they did not believe it. When Chernzong first appeared, his battle strength was only at the low realm. Now that he had risen to the transcendent realm, it was already very shocking. How could he have leaped to the invincible heaven rank in one step? He was a monster. For example, the older generation like them had inheritances, opportunities, and a certain amount of talent. Even so, they had to spend a lot of time and resources to have a chance of cultivating to the transcendent realm. Facing two transcendent realm experts of the older generation, Chernzong's expression did not change. He only slowly raised the heavenly will sword, held it horizontally in front of him, and then swung it forward. The sword seemed slow, but it was actually extremely fast. As the saying goes, when things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. When it was fast to the extreme, it appeared to be slow. However, that slowness was only a kind of visual deception. It was not actually slow. The single heart sword technique. This sword was also the single heart sword technique. There was no fixed move to speak of. How to use it depended on one's heart. The faces of the two transcendent realm experts of the older generation suddenly changed. When the sword light rushed forward, they felt as if their surroundings had slowed down. However, that was not the case. It was their thoughts that had slowed down, because they could not keep up with the speed of Chernzong's sword. In an instant, the two of them were hit by the sword at the same time. The destructive sword qi invaded their bodies. Chapter 29:53. 3 strikes. Chernzong had only struck 3 times. These 3 strikes were all part of the single heart sword technique. There was no division of moves. Everything depended on one's heart. With just 3 strikes, Chernzong had crippled 4 Heaven Realm Transcendent Realm experts. Heaven Realm Transcendent Realm experts were very rare experts no matter where they were. Their status was extraordinary, even in the Holy Lands. They were very precious. Losing one of them was a great loss. Now there were 4 of them. Even Yu Feilong was a transcendent realm expert who had left his name on the sealed sky monument. He was a peerless genius who was expected to be invincible in the heaven realm in the future. The loss was much greater. Chernzong did not kill them because he had scruples, not because he was tired of crippling them. However, it was actually enough to cripple their cultivation. In particular, these 4 transcending realm cultivators had been corroded by the turbid qi of the turbid qi Dao concealing array of turbid qi. The price they had to pay to recover their cultivation was many times greater, and the possibility of that happening was even lower. Next, Chernzong began to break the array. In the last 15 minutes, Chernzong had gradually found a flaw in the array. As for the turbid gas that had invaded his body, it could not contaminate Chernzong's cultivation at all. Under the 3rd level of the Celestial Demon Sword technique, Chernzong directly refined it. The array was indeed effective in hiding the aura of the Great Path, but the effect on Chernzong was very weak because of the uniqueness of the single heart sword technique. Unknowingly, Chernzong had embarked on a path that was completely his own. Although he had just started and still had a long way to go, he was different from many other cultivators. With a solemn expression, Chernzong raised his sword and held it in front of him. A flash of sword light was reflected in his eyes. It was sharp and bright. The power of the pure heart realm, together with his divine consciousness, spread out in all directions and covered everything. All the aura was sensed by Chernzong. Traces of aura were faintly discernible. His left hand was like a sword. He pointed at the spine of the sword and slowly drew it. Wisps of sword qi surged and spread on the spine of the sword, then spread to the blade, cutting the void. True sword sharpening technique. Slash. He swung his sword and slashed across the sky. A wisp of sword light instantly slashed into the void, cutting through everything, as if it was in accordance with one of the trajectories. This was Chernzong's meticulous sword attack. He had maximized its power, and the true grinding swordsmanship had multiplied its power. With a single slash, all of the turbid air was sliced apart. The sword light tore through the air, sweeping everything before it. As the sword light tore through the air, A series of rumbling sounds rang out, and the ground shook violently. Dissipated. The turbid air began to dissipate at an astonishing speed, and the 64 heaven-rank powerhouses who had joined forces to set up this formation all let out muffled groans. They couldn't help but spit out mouthfuls of blood. This was the backlash of forcefully breaking the formation, causing them to suffer internal injuries. Chunzong was not polite at all. He waved his sword again and again. The sword light was like a torrential rain of pear blossoms. In an instant, it slashed in all directions and hit the 64 Heaven Stage Final Extremity Realm Warriors. What a useless person. 4 Heaven Stage Ultra Extremity Realm Warriors and 64 Heaven Stage Final Extremity Realm Warriors. Not a single one of them died, but all of them had their cultivation crippled and were directly reduced to useless people. To the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land, such a loss could be said to be a great loss. It was extremely disastrous. However, Chunzong would not hold back just because of the other party's identity. If it were not for the fact that he was worried about the sword-sharpening mountain lord's soul wreaking havoc, none of these people would have survived. Even though crippling their cultivation was an extremely severe consequence, Chunzong preferred to kill. When he was strong enough to not have to worry about the sword-sharpening mountain master's soul, that would be it. It was time to truly kill with his sword. With a casual swing of his sword, the sword light tore through the air towards the Butterfly Valley Master. Although the Butterfly Valley Master did not really cause any harm to him, she was in cahoots with Yu Feilong and the others. Her cultivation was also crippled. After doing all this, it was time to reap the rewards. The spoils of war. One by one, the storage divine tools were taken away by Chunzong. After that, he slowly cracked the imprints on them and made them his own. It was enough to replenish his wealth. Moreover, although the battle was short, he had indeed brought out his true strength. He had some new insights into the single-hearted sword technique that needed to be properly comprehended. Ignoring these crippled people, Chunzong once again soared into the sky. The sword light dragged his feet as he flew on his sword. On this trip, Chunzong planned to find Hu Ji. Although he was unwilling to admit it, Chunzong felt that Hu Ji should be an insider. No, not only an insider, but she even seemed to be cooperating with Yu Feilong. She used the name of Yu Nianxin to trick him. This was not kindness, but resentment. Repaying kindness with kindness and resentment with resentment. It was so direct and simple. Repaying resentment with justice? That was not Chunzong's style. If he was wrong, then he was wrong. Chunzong flew away quickly. In Butterfly Valley there were howls of anguish. Immediately Yu Feilong struggled to get up. His face was extremely ferocious. He took out a token and used all his strength to activate it. Fortunately, although his cultivation was crippled, there was still a little left. The power of his cultivation was not completely exhausted, and it was enough to activate this token. Riding his sword, Chunzong flew hundreds of miles. Suddenly, he noticed that the sky was filled with dark clouds. It was as if something had appeared out of nowhere. Soon, a large patch of dark clouds covered the sky, as if a storm was coming. Chunzong's expression changed involuntarily. He was a little surprised and doubtful. Staring at the sky, his brows were tightly knitted. What was going on? Was the weather changing? It did not seem to be that simple. Chunzong felt a kind of pressure from it. It was so heavy that it was as if the sky was about to collapse. It hit his body as if it was trying to suppress him. This feeling did not feel like a normal storm. It felt like it was man-made. Go! Without any hesitation, Chunzong increased his speed. This change made Chunzong feel uneasy. A strong sense of threat emerged from the depths of his heart. After Chunzong grasped the quasi-supreme sword realm, this sense of danger became stronger and clearer. However, the dark clouds continued to expand. No matter how hard Chunzong tried to ride his sword, he could not get rid of them. In the next moment, the sky seemed to shatter. It was as if a mirror had been shattered. From the center of the shattering, a bit of light bloomed. It was a bit of dark golden light. Upon closer inspection, one would find that it was actually a finger. A finger that was completely dark golden. It was covered with unique patterns and had an indescribable unique charm. It was the Taoist rhyme, the mystery of the origin of the great path. One finger to shatter the sky. It was truly a finger that could shatter the sky. The terrifying pressure landed on Chen Zong's body, and the finger also landed. Chen Zong only felt his body sink. It was as if he was being suppressed by an invisible mountain. He was about to sink. The surrounding space was also sealed. Chen Zong was constantly suppressed. The feeling of suffocation came. It did not matter to Chen Zong whether he breathed or not. However, the feeling of suffocation was very uncomfortable. It was extremely oppressive. So strong. Chen Zong was shocked. He immediately burst out with all his strength. He had to burst out. Time divine technique, flowing breath. Chen Zong once again collided with the origin of time of the ancient mysterious world. He forcibly intercepted a breath of time. However, the recoil he received was not as intense as before. He could completely withstand it. He completely burst out and counterattacked. The astonishing pressure shook it a little. Then, he slashed out with his sword. The most powerful sword of the single-hearted sword technique under the true grinding sword technique was not slashed at the dark golden finger in the sky. Instead, it slashed at the void in front of him. The sword slashed a crack. Chen Zong immediately rode on his sword and turned into a sword light to escape. Chen Zong did not know if it was an auditory hallucination. He seemed to have heard a sound of surprise, but it was very faint. Immediately afterward, the dark golden finger rapidly enlarged, turning into a huge finger. Like a huge pillar, it struck down. Everywhere it passed, the void shattered, and everything was destroyed. The pressure suddenly increased. Chen Zong's body unconsciously paused. The sword light under his feet almost collapsed. The huge dark golden finger directly struck down and touched Chen Zong's body. Chen Zong's body trembled. He only felt an extremely terrifying force, like a torrent bursting through a dam. It directly blasted into Chen Zong's body in an extremely domineering and terrifying manner. The force was extremely domineering and unreasonably violent. It blasted into Chen Zong's body and began to impact Chen Zong's strength. Even his bones and internal organs were impacted. The violent impact was so violent that it directly shattered. The power of the third stage of the Celestial Demon Sword technique was strong, but it was no match for this force. They were not on the same level at all. How could it be described? There was an essential difference. It was like the essential difference between rough wood and tempered steel. Chen Zong fell like a meteor and directly hit the ground. With a boom, Chen Zong fell into the ground, creating a huge crater. In the next moment, the huge dark golden finger continued to shrink. A figure appeared in the sky with his hands behind his back. He looked down condescendingly, his eyes shining with a dark golden light. This person was dressed in a white robe with dragon patterns. He looked like a middle-aged man, but his hair was gray and there were many wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. It was obvious that he was very old. As for how old he was, it was hard to say. "He's not dead yet." Frowning slightly, a look of surprise flashed across this person's face. It was really surprising that he could still survive under his attack. In the next moment, this person's expression became more and more surprised. This was because he found that there was an astonishing vitality in the crater below. Immediately, this person stretched out his hand and grabbed. A powerful force burst out, and Chen Zong's body was directly pulled out of the crater. His clothes were completely tattered, and his entire body was covered in blood. He looked as if he had been fished out from a pool of blood. In fact, his blood was still dripping down. His aura was extremely weak, and he appeared to be on the verge of death. However, the mysterious seed's vitality was constantly released. It spread throughout Chenzong's body and quickly healed Chenzong's injuries. However, the injuries this time were too severe. The power was too terrifying. Even with the mysterious seed's astonishing vitality, it could not heal in a short period of time. This person stared at Chenzong, as if he wanted to see through Chenzong. He also felt the astonishing vitality in Chenzong's body. His gaze focused directly on Chenzong's qi, and he pointed his finger. First, set a small target. For example, 1 second. Remember, book guest house. Chapter 2954. The finger was simple, but it contained an incomparable rhythm, as if it was in harmony with everything in the world. It pointed directly at Chenzong's qi. Chenzong could feel it, but he could not dodge or defend himself. That feeling of helplessness deeply impacted Chenzong's mind, causing him to sink into despair bit by bit. Could it be that his cultivation was going to be crippled just like that? Just like how he destroyed the others? Was this karma? Countless thoughts came to his mind in an instant, but Chenzong did not give up. Burst. He kept unleashing his power. He could not accept such an outcome. However, his opponent was too strong. Even if Chenzong unleashed all the power he had, he could only shake him. He could not break free. It was not that Chenzong did not want to, but that he could not. If he had the power of blood, Chenzong would burn it without hesitation. He would burn it completely in exchange for more power to get out of this predicament. However, Chenzong did not have any powerful blood. What should he do? Countless thoughts flashed in his mind. They were so crazy that they were about to explode. Chenzong kept thinking. Finally, he fixed his eyes on the black mark. At this moment, this was the only way to save himself. However, this was like driving a tiger to devour a wolf. Chenzong had no idea what the consequences would be. The sword-grinding mountain master. If the spiritual soul of the sword-grinding mountain master appeared and occupied his body, he would definitely be able to unleash more power. It should not be difficult to break free from this master. Chenzong guessed that this master was a saint-level master. Chenzong felt helpless that a saint-level master was targeting him. In short, he could not deal with such a master, but he was not willing to be treated like this. He could only take the risk. He would use the sword-grinding mountain master to deal with his opponent. There were 2 outcomes. The first was that the sword-grinding mountain master could break free. The second was that the sword-grinding mountain master failed. If the Lord of Sword-Sharpening Mountain won, his body would be occupied in the future. As for whether he could take it back, Chenzong was not sure. Luck was very important. If it was the latter, then there was nothing to worry about. In the end, it was a gamble. The seal was lifted. Although he wasn't sure if the seal could really seal the black mark, it was better to remove it first. Godly Descent Secret Technique. Chenzong unleashed his divine arrival secret technique to the fullest extent without any hesitation. This was because Chenzong still had a sliver of hope in his heart, which was to use the divine arrival secret technique to borrow the power of the black mark or the sword-grinding mountain master without alerting him. This was undoubtedly the best. However, Chenzong immediately knew that the sliver of hope in his heart did not exist at all. When the God's Descent secret technique was fully exerted, a powerful force erupted and surged out from the black mark like a flood bursting a dam. It was vast and surging like the Milky Way pouring down. Within the black mark, a figure also appeared. His eyes were extremely bright, as if a god or devil had descended. It was an irresistible force that was extremely powerful. It directly occupied Chenzong's spiritual sea and pushed Chenzong's spirit aside. However, this time, Chenzong did not faint. He was just pushed aside by force. It was much better than the previous time when he fainted directly. In this way, it was not impossible to take back his body. It all happened in a flash. From the moment Chen Zong removed the seal of the black mark to the moment he unleashed the divine arrival secret technique to the fullest extent, to the moment the sword-grinding mountain master's spirit appeared and occupied Chen Zong's body. The entire process seemed to take a long time, but in fact it was only an extremely short moment. It was so short that it was indescribable. Chen Zong's aura suddenly changed greatly. His eyes also changed. Black and white were extremely distinct. They were so black that they were so deep that they devoured all light like a black hole. His eyes were so white that they were extremely holy. The contrast between black and white was so clear that it made each other even more shocking. His aura continued to surge, and it was extremely overbearing. There was also an indescribable darkness that spread out. The expression of the expert who had grabbed Chen Zong's body suddenly changed. The finger that was pointing at Chen Zong's qi also exploded in an instant. Its speed more than doubled, and its power more than doubled. He was worried that something unexpected would happen. It was obvious that Chen Zong's aura had changed. It was completely different from before. It was like a terrifying aura that erupted from the abyss. It was as if a great demon king had come into being. It was blocked. The terrifying finger that was pointing at Chen Zong's qi was blocked. It exploded. The extremely terrifying sword will also exploded in an instant, shattering the space. An amazing force surged, as if there was a big explosion. It blasted out a pitch-black space crack. Two figures flew out, and Chen Zong also escaped from the expert's grasp. "Who are you?" The gray-haired, middle-aged expert frowned. There was a look of surprise and uncertainty in his eyes. He stared at Chen Zong solemnly. He immediately felt that the other party had changed. Although he still looked like the same person, it was as if he had changed into another person. It was just that his appearance and figure were the same, but his aura was completely different. The ancient sealed world? I haven't been here for many years. A touch of vicissitudes flashed in the depths of Chen Zong's eyes. It was as if the world had been turned upside down. Immediately, that pair of eyes full of vicissitudes stared at the face of the middle-aged man in front of him. His extremely deep eyes made the middle-aged man narrow his eyes involuntarily. He was extremely fearful. What was going on? It was as if he had changed into another person. Such an aura and such a gaze made the middle-aged man feel frightened for no reason. He has actually grown to such an extent that even a quasi-saint has to take action? In fact, this was not Chen Zong. It was the sword-sharpening mountain lord who had occupied Chen Zong's body. With just one confrontation, he had seen through the other party's details. Quasi-saint. What was a quasi-saint? The so-called quasi-saint was a cultivator who had failed to break through to the saint stage but had survived. They had surpassed the level of the heaven stage, but were unable to truly reach the saint stage. They could only take half a step into the threshold of the saint stage, and had grasped a trace of power that only a saint stage expert had. This was an essential difference from a heaven stage expert. The outcome of failing to break through to the saint stage was often terrible. However, it was different in the inner universe. If one failed to break through, there was still a possibility of surviving and becoming a quasi-saint, unable to break through to the saint stage for the rest of their lives. There were no quasi-saints in the outer universe because it was very difficult to break through to the saint stage in the outer universe. Once the breakthrough failed, the outcome would be death. Quasi-saints only existed in the inner universe. Even so, there were very few quasi-saints. There were even fewer quasi-saints than heaven stage expert. However, as a whole, there were more quasi-saints than saints. This was because quasi-saints possessed part of the power of a saint stage expert. For cultivators below the quasi-saint level, quasi-saints were not much different from saints. In any case, quasi-saints were not a match for quasi-saints and would be easily suppressed. Chernzong's strength was also at the level of heaven stage experts, but he was easily suppressed by this person. This was enough to show how astonishing a quasi-saint was. In the spirit sea, Chernzong's spirit was pushed to the side. However, he could still sense and hear the sounds outside. Quasi-saint. It turned out that the person who was dealing with him was a quasi-saint and not a true saint stage expert. A quasi-saint was already so strong. Was the gap between him and a heaven stage expert so huge? Then how strong was a true saint stage expert? When Chernzong was possessed previously, he was unconscious. Although there were records of the heavenly sword of will afterward, it wasn't so clear. Now, he could more directly and even personally experience the strength of quasi-saints and even saint stage experts. This was even more helpful for his own improvement. Pressure. When the quasi-saint from the heavenly dragon Holy Land faced the sword-sharpening mountain lord, he felt an astonishing pressure for no reason. It was as if he was facing a true saint stage expert. With his rich experience, he immediately understood that there was an ancient and powerful spirit hidden in this person's body. It should be the spirit of a saint stage expert. When it saw that this person was in danger, it appeared and borrowed this person's body. His guess was partially correct, but partially wrong. This ancient and powerful spirit of a saint stage expert wasn't actually protecting Chernzong. It was trying to possess him, and it succeeded. "Sir, I'm quasi-saint from the heavenly dragon Holy Land, Lord Jin Xian." The quasi-saint hurriedly defended himself. He first mentioned the heavenly dragon Holy Land. That was a holy land, a powerful force with true saint stage experts. Moreover, there was more than one of them. He wanted to show off his imposing manner to intimidate the other party to a certain extent. Then, he talked about his other identity. He was an important figure in the heavenly dragon Holy Land. "But I wonder how I should address you? Heavenly dragon Holy Land?" The sword-sharpening mountain lord's gaze was deep and profound. However, he didn't answer the other party's question. Instead, he said, "Is that old thing ancestor heavenly dragon still alive?" The sword-sharpening mountain lord's rhetorical question instantly shocked the quasi-saint Lord Jin Xian. Ancestor heavenly dragon. That was the strongest expert of the heavenly dragon Holy Land. He was also the founder of the heavenly dragon Holy Land. He was powerful and had a high status. Many people knew about him, but they were all legend. A saint stage expert who dared to call ancestor heavenly dragon an old thing. What did that mean? It meant that he might be an expert from the same era as ancestor heavenly dragon. Moreover, he might be acquainted with him. Senior, since he's an acquaintance of ancestor heavenly dragon Holy Land, then this is a misunderstanding. Lord Jin Xian hurriedly said. Although he was a quasi-saint, he didn't have the confidence to fight against an ancient saint stage expert, who knew what kind of unique methods the quasi-saint lord had. Junior will take his leave first. Go back and tell ancestor heavenly dragon. Maybe ancestor heavenly dragon will come and look for Senior to talk about the old days. There was no threat in his tone, but there was a hint of warning in his voice. Ancestor heavenly dragon. Ancestor heavenly dragon was an ancient saint stage expert. An ordinary saint stage expert couldn't be compared to him. You should stay. As for that old thing ancestor heavenly dragon, when the time is right, I will look for him. The sword-sharpening mountain lord smiled faintly. His eyes became deeper and deeper. The light that shot out from his eyes made Lord Jin Xian's heart jump. He instinctively felt that something was wrong. Without hesitation, he immediately burst out with extreme speed and wanted to escape. However, how could the sword-sharpening mountain lord let him go? A quasi-saint's divine spirit was a great tonic. After devouring it, the sword-sharpening mountain lord's divine spirit would recover greatly. It would also increase the strength of the body. When the sword-sharpening mountain lord's divine spirit and recovering his strength, he would be able to hunt down those divine spirits and extract their divine essences. He would be able to cultivate the fourth level of the Fiend God Sword Codex that the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's divine spirit 1,000,000 years ago. Chapter 2955. Eternal Night. With a slash of the sword, darkness suddenly descended. This darkness came so suddenly and caught Lord Jin Xian off guard. It was hard for him to react. All the light in front of him disappeared instantly. Heaven and earth fell into darkness. It was as deep as an abyss. He couldn't even see his fingers when he stretched out his hand. How could this darkness be so deep? A beam of sword light suddenly appeared and slashed through the darkness, bringing with it an even more extreme darkness. It directly locked onto Lord Jin Xian. There was no way to avoid it. There was no way to resist it. Chen Zong's cultivation had reached the peak of the heaven stage. His combat strength had reached the invincible heaven stage, which was equivalent to the invincible semi-saint stage in the outer universe. He was more than 10 times stronger than when he was first possessed by the sword-sharpening Mountain Master. With such strength, under the sword-sharpening Mountain Master's superb supreme sword realm, the power he displayed was even more terrifying. It was more than 10 times stronger. Once the supreme sword technique, the demon sword technique, was used, even the demon saint of the purgatory demon sect would not be able to resist its power and would be injured directly, let alone a quasi-saint. Lord Jin Xian crazily burst forth and burned his bloodline because he knew that if he did not do so, he might be killed on the spot. Only by using all his strength would he have some hope. The hope of survival, the hope of escape. Even if it was just a trace of hope, he had to grasp it. His bloodline burned, and the dragon's roar was extremely loud. It was as if the roar could shatter the sky. An incomparably tyrannical aura erupted like a torrent bursting through a dam. Lord Jin Xian flicked his finger, condensing a dark golden light. He suddenly pointed forward and pointed at the sword light that was tearing through the air. It seemed to be cutting through the darkness and bringing with it an even more extreme darkness. The dark golden light skyrocketed. As it rotated at high speed, it rushed out like a star. The dark golden starlight suddenly stopped and then shattered. It was directly cut and shattered by the eternal night sword light. The sword light arrived with irresistible force and slashed through Lord Jin Xian's body. Lord Jin Xian's face was full of astonishment, and there was a trace of fear in the depths of his eyes. How could it be? How could the gap be so huge? The difference between a quasi-saint and a saint was this great. The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord had been a top saint when he was alive. Even though he was no longer the same as before, he could still exert the strength of an ordinary saint with his supreme sword way. The Eternal Night was his ultimate move, and it was extremely powerful. The last time he used it, he was unable to bear the burden. But this time, he was able to bear it, and he was able to bring out the full power of the Eternal Night. It was normal for Dao Master Jin Xian to be unable to withstand it. The darkness dissipated. As if it was an illusion, a smile appeared on the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's lips. That smile rapidly widened. The divine soul of a quasi-saint. The divine soul of a quasi-saint was definitely a great tonic for him. After devouring it, it would definitely allow his divine soul to recover further and increase his strength. Only by becoming stronger would he be able to kill stronger existences and devour divine souls of higher quality, which would be more beneficial to his recovery. If this cycle continued, he would be able to peek into the realm that his original body could not reach, the realm beyond the saint realm. True God! The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord could not help but sigh. He was filled with endless regret and hope. Now, he saw hope. His past regrets would be fulfilled. Moreover, Chernzong's body seemed to be better than his original body. He grabbed Dao Master Jin Xian's divine soul with his left hand. At the same time, he urged the power of the mysterious seed to devour Tao Master Jin Xian's life force. The life force in his body was very strong, and the mysterious seed's life force recovered a lot. "Let me go." Tao Master Jin Xian's divine soul struggled. His face was as ferocious as a demon's. "Ancestor Tian Long will not let you go. Soon, I will devour him too." The sword-sharpening mountain lord's face seemed to flash with a sinister smile. He did not hesitate to devour Tao Master Jin Xian's divine soul. A sudden change occurred. The heavenly will sword, which had returned to its scabbard, suddenly burst out of its scabbard. In an instant, it seemed to be held in the hand of a peerless swordsman. It swung the most dazzling sword in the world. It was not aimed at the sword-sharpening mountain lord, but at Tao Master Jin Xian's divine soul. "Do you think I will let you have your way?" The sword-sharpening mountain lord reacted instantly. His right hand formed a sword and suddenly pointed at the peerless sword that the heavenly will sword had unleashed. This was a confrontation between two peerless swordsmen. In that instant of collision, the heavenly will sword suddenly stopped. The sword light shattered inch by inch and the sword trembled. The sword-sharpening mountain lord's sword finger was also repelled. The power of the heavenly will sword's attack was beyond the sword-sharpening mountain lord's expectations. "Let's die together." Tao Master Jin Xian was a quasi-saint after all. He already had some of the abilities of a saint-level expert. Even if his divine soul was extracted, he did not completely lose the ability to resist and counterattack. He immediately seized the opportunity to detonate his own divine soul. He would die either way and his soul would be destroyed. Since that was the case, he might as well detonate his own divine soul and severely injure his opponent. It was better than being devoured by his opponent and becoming a tonic to increase his opponent's strength. The sword-sharpening mountain lord's expression changed drastically. He immediately unleashed his strength to resist. However, he was caught off guard. The self-detonation of a quasi-saint's divine soul was extremely terrifying. It directly covered several hundred meters. The space within several dozen meters was completely shattered, enveloping the sword-sharpening mountain lord. The sword-sharpening mountain lord resisted with all his might. His body was also constantly attacked. The mysterious seed's vitality was constantly being depleted, sweeping through his body like a torrent bursting through a dam. It constantly healed his injuries. The sword-sharpening mountain lord's divine soul was also constantly being depleted. The power of the self-detonation of a divine soul had to be resisted with divine soul power. The effect was the best. The self-detonation of Tao Master Jin Xian's divine soul lasted for 9 breaths of time. It only ended after 10 breaths of time. The shattered space also recovered. The sword-sharpening mountain lord stood in the sky. His robes were extremely tattered, and he looked extremely miserable. His face was pale, and his eyes were filled with exhaustion. There was also an indescribable fury. This time, he only needed to devour the quasi-saint's divine soul to recover a lot of his divine soul power. He did not expect such an unforeseen event to occur, causing his opponent to seize the opportunity to self-detonate his divine soul. Not only could he not recover, but he also used up a lot of divine soul power. The loss could be said to be disastrous. Fury! The sword-sharpening mountain lord was extremely furious. His eyes immediately landed on the heavenly will sword. If the sword had not suddenly erupted, he would not have ended up like this. Destroy it. There was no need for such a disobedient thing to exist. As if sensing the sword-sharpening mountain lord's malice, the heavenly will sword began to tremble violently. Its hum became even more resounding and sharp. Strands of extremely terrifying sword chi also emanated from the sword, surging endlessly. Determination. The aura emanating from the heavenly will sword was so determined. It was the determination to fight for survival in the face of death. Even if it was destroyed, it would definitely not yield to the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. Be destroyed. With that, the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's sword finger immediately pierced through the air. The sword finger of the supreme way of the sword was extremely terrifying. It was extremely shocking. The heavenly will sword erupted. Its sword light was extremely dazzling. It charged towards the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord fearlessly. It was determined to injure him even if it was destroyed. Collision. The sword light shattered. The heavenly will sword was immediately repelled. The sword trembled endlessly, letting out a hum as if it was wailing. However, it charged towards the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord again without fear. 1 sword, 2 swords, 3 swords, the heavenly will sword was repelled time and time again. However, with each subsequent sword strike, its power decreased. Its speed also became slower and slower. The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord also noticed this. A vicious glint flashed in his eyes. His tyrannical power suddenly condensed, transforming into a peerless sword. It carried an extremely terrifying power as it charged towards the heavenly will sword. This sword finger was unstoppable. There was nothing it could not destroy. The heavenly will sword could not help but tremble. If it was hit, it would probably be damaged again. With the heavenly will sword's material, it was impossible to destroy it. However, its power had not completely recovered. If it was hit, it would be damaged again. Even so, the heavenly will sword had no intention of retreating. In the end, it exploded. The situation changed once again. Chunzong's spiritual soul launched a counterattack, directly attacking the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's spiritual soul. The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's spiritual soul was indeed very strong. The moment it appeared, it repelled Chunzong's spiritual soul. However, now, due to the self-destruction of Lord Jinchuan's spiritual soul, the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's spiritual power had been depleted by more than half. In addition, the explosive attack of the heavenly will sword further depleted his spiritual power. Chunzong seized the opportunity to counterattack. One must know that Chunzong's spiritual soul was not weak either. Working together, they immediately attacked the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. As a result, the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord was caught in a difficult situation. "Do you want to die together with me?" The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord roared as he defended. However, Chunzong had no intention of responding. He continued to attack. The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord was even more furious. Originally, everything should have been under his control. Last time, he deliberately returned the body to Chunzong. However, he did not expect to be in such a predicament this time. Damn it! Everything deserves to die. Everything deserves to be destroyed. The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's spiritual soul had fallen into a frenzy. He fought with all his might. There was an extremely determined aura about him. It was as if he really wanted to die together with Chunzong. Chunzong was not afraid. However, he was not willing to die together with the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. "Your inheritance is mine. Everything you have is mine." The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord roared as he continued to counterattack. "Since it's all yours, then take it back." Chunzong was even more determined. In fact, Chunzong had the same idea long ago. However, once he gave up, his cultivation would be gone. It was equivalent to losing his cultivation and losing his strength. That was why Chunzong chose to seal the black mark. However, now, Chunzong realized that as long as he still had his cultivation, he would be entangled with the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. Even if he temporarily defeated the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord, he would still come back. The sword-sharpening Mountain Lord had already set his eyes on his body when he inherited the celestial demon sword codex. He wanted to take over his body. In addition to some other inspirations, Chunzong vaguely grasped another way forward. However, he was not so sure. However, he had to make a choice now. Chapter 2956. Battle. An intense battle. The internal battle between the spirit and the external battle between the sword principles. Chunzong's cooperation with the heavenly will sword had reached its peak, and the sword-sharpening mountain master's fury had reached its peak. "I'll return all of your inheritance to you," Chunzong said. His words were filled with unparalleled determination. In the next moment, Chunzong did not hesitate to disperse his cultivation base, the cultivation base that he had cultivated from the sword god and demon sword mantra. Chunzong immediately realized that when he dispersed his cultivation base from the sword god and demon sword mantra, the sword-sharpening mountain master's spirit and aura were also changing. The connection between him and his body was becoming faint and blurry. Fury. The sword-sharpening mountain master was extremely furious. He had never thought that his opponent would be so determined and decisive. He did not hesitate to give up the power that he had cultivated with great difficulty. The sword god and demon sword mantra. This was the top inheritance in both the outer and inner universes, especially the fourth level. Once mastered, one would be able to dominate everything and master the mysteries of surpassing the sage level. They would be able to reach the true God level that had never been seen before. 1,000,000 years ago, he had studied it meticulously and experimented with it countless times before finally confirming it. He had even sacrificed the destruction of the sword-sharpening mountain, but he had still failed because of a small mistake. However, after so many years of accumulation, it had truly been perfected. There were no longer any mistakes or drawbacks. As long as one continued to cultivate it step by step, it would not be difficult to reach the sage level. It was even possible to surpass the sage level. Who would be able to resist such a temptation? The deeper one cultivated the sword god and demon sword mantra, the deeper one's connection with the sword-sharpening mountain master would be. His body would also be more compatible with the sword-sharpening mountain master's spirit and become a vessel for him to return to the world. Chunzong had cultivated it to the third level. His body was 100% compatible with the sword-grinding mountain lord's soul. Because of this, the sword-grinding mountain lord was able to possess Chunzong so easily. Moreover, he did not need to do anything to control Chunzong's power. In addition, as long as Chunzong still had the Fiend God Sword Codex, even if the sword-grinding mountain lord failed to possess Chunzong, he would still have a chance to possess Chunzong again. He was like a ticking time bomb, threatening Chunzong at all times. But now, as Chunzong resolutely and voluntarily dispersed the cultivation of the godly demon sword mantra, the compatibility between the sword-sharpening mountain chief's soul and Chunzong's body began to decrease. Lunatic! Sword-sharpening mountain's mountain lord cursed angrily, becoming even more alarmed. However, was he supposed to admit defeat? That was impossible, absolutely impossible. Since that was the case, he had to be even more resolute. Sword-sharpening mountain's mountain lord also erupted. The black mark suddenly trembled, directly producing a shocking devouring power. Like a black hole, it erupted wildly and directly invaded Chunzong's body. Chunzong immediately felt his power being devoured wildly. His essence, spirit, and soul were also enveloped by the terrifying devouring power. All this time, sword-sharpening mountain chief had not devoured Chunzong's soul. It was not because he was unwilling, but because Chunzong's soul and his body were of the same origin. If he devoured it directly, it would cause negative effects. Sword-sharpening mountain chief planned to slowly wear down Chunzong's soul bit by bit so that there would not be any side effects. Only then would he be able to truly, completely, and perfectly control Chunzong's body. He valued this vessel very much. He could not afford to make any mistakes. Otherwise, it might affect his final breakthrough. However, now, he had no choice but to do so. He did not care if there would be any side effect. As long as Chunzong's spirit was devoured, all resistance would disappear. Everything would belong to him. As for the other side effects and mistakes, he could not care less about them. Since he had already come this far, he had no choice but to do so. A battle of life and death. It was an extremely dangerous battle of life and death. Chen Zong only felt his powerful essence, spirit, and soul being continuously devoured. His soul also began to sway, as if it was tightly grabbed by an invisible hand and pulled towards the black mark. Chen Zong originally planned to slowly disperse the cultivation power that came from the Sword God and Demon Sword Codex so that his body would not be damaged. As for the great decrease in his strength after losing his cultivation, he had to think of another way. Moreover, he had another idea. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to try it out. If he failed, then he would have to find a good cultivation method to cultivate again. With his experience and the support of many resources, it wouldn't take too long. However, now that the black mark had erupted, the sword-sharpening mountain lord had made it clear that he was determined to fight to the death. He could not disperse the power so slowly. He had to speed up, even if it would cause damage to himself. The power dispersed, like a torrent bursting through a dam, gushing towards Chen Zong's body. As his body trembled violently, streaks of blood spurted out from all over his body, dyeing his body red. Under such a violent impact, his veins were directly affected and ruptured. His organs were also affected and damaged. Even his bones, muscles, and skin were damaged. Fight. The sword-sharpening mountain lord was fighting, and so was Chen Zong. He was risking his life. This was because his life and future were at stake. Give up. It's just a futile struggle. The sword-sharpening mountain lord tried to use words to shake Chen Zong's will. Especially under such resistance, his will was more easily shaken. As long as you give your body to me, I can bring you to the peak of the universe and become a supreme true god. True god? True god? Chen Zong did not understand. He had never heard of this before, so he was very curious. However, Chen Zong also knew that now was not the time to ask. Once he asked, he would definitely be affected by the sword-sharpening mountain lord, weakening his resistance. If it's not mine, I can give it up. What's mine is mine. No one can touch it. Chen Zong's response was extremely firm, leaving no room for doubt. Even if he had to destroy it, he would not leave it to the sword-sharpening mountain lord. Finally, Chen Zong's essence, energy, and spirit were all devoured by the black mark. After losing his essence, energy, and spirit, Chen Zong's spirit also became drowsy. He felt like he was dying, like a fish that had been thrown onto the shore and exposed to the scorching sun for a long time. On the other hand, Chen Zong's body was completely stained with blood. A layer of blood covered his entire body, making him look extremely terrifying and shocking. All the power that he had cultivated from the third level of the Fiend God Sword Mantra had been completely dispersed by Chen Zong in an extremely violent manner. What did this mean? It meant that Chen Zong had lost his cultivation base. He had lost his tyrannical strength that was invincible in the heaven rank. Fortunately, his cultivation base had not been destroyed. It had been dissipated on its own. It could be cultivated again, but it would take time and the corresponding resources. Such a price was also very shocking. After all, his cultivation base had not been easy to come by. Moreover, Chen Zong had cultivated an extremely tyrannical and supreme inheritance like the mythical demon sword codex. As the person involved, Chen Zong was very clear about the difficulties involved. However, he still had to give up what he had to give up. Only when you give up something can you gain something. After Chen Zong had dissipated all the power of his cultivation base from the mythical demon sword codex, the devouring power of the black mark suddenly decreased. It could no longer affect Chen Zong's spirit. Almost. Just a little bit more and it could have devoured Chen Zong's spirit. Just a little bit more, not even a breath's worth of time. He had failed on the verge of success. At this moment, Chunzong's spirit was in a trance. It was as if he was about to faint. However, he had to endure this feeling of fainting. The sword-sharpening mountain lord was not feeling well at all. Activating the black mark had consumed a lot of his spirit power. He was also in a weakened state. The sound of a sword chime rang out. It came from afar and neared. It went from faint to clear. Immediately, a ray of sword light entered Chunzong's spiritual sea and flew towards Chunzong's spirit. It quickly shrank and finally fell into Chunzong's hand. It was the Heavenly Will Sword. The power of the Heavenly Will Sword was also greatly depleted. There was not much left. When the Heavenly Will Sword was in his hand, Chunzong's spirit immediately felt a cooling aura spread out. It refreshed his spirit and seemed to have recovered some of his strength. He drew his sword. He immediately performed the single-hearted sword principle. Within the spiritual sea, he used his spirit to perform the sword principle. He did not need the support of his cultivation base. The sword light pierced through the air and slashed towards the sword-sharpening mountain lord's spirit. The sword-sharpening mountain lord waved his hand. Immediately, the black mark flashed and condensed into a sharp black sword. He held it in his hand and attacked. It was the supreme sword principle that he had mastered, the demon sword principle. Upon contact, Chunzong's sword principle was immediately defeated. The difference between a quasi-supreme sword principle and a supreme sword principle was too great. However, although Chunzong was shocked, he was not discouraged nor did he admit defeat. He waved his sword again and fought fiercely. If he could not block it with one sword, he would use two. If he could not block it with two, he would use three. The swords pierced through the air. They were all single-hearted sword principle, but they were continuously defeated. At the same time, Chunzong's spirit body was continuously injured by the swords. Strands of spirit power floated out. The supreme sword principle's suppression on Chunzong was too strong. At the same time, under the suppression of his opponent's supreme sword principle, Chunzong's single-hearted sword principle was also improving at an alarming speed. First, he merged the heart sword principle and the world sword principle. Then, he slowly merged the void kill sword principle into it. It made the single-hearted sword principle more mysterious and powerful. After being hit by the swords continuously, Chunzong's spirit body became more and more faint. His power was also decreasing. Even though his sword principle had improved, he could not recover from the disadvantage. In the face of absolute power, all schemes are but petty tricks. The sword-sharpening mountain master sneered. He attacked with his sword again. The sword light was extremely dark, as if the demonic power of the abyss had descended. Chunzong's sword light was destroyed once again, and his divine soul body was struck once more, causing it to become even fainter. At this rate, Chunzong's divine soul body would be destroyed in just 3 sword strikes. Only 3 sword strikes or so. At that time, he would lose all ability to fight back. As if sensing Chunzong's current state, the Heavenly Will Sword trembled violently. It was full of determination, as if it was saying something, as if it was bidding farewell to Chunzong. Immediately, a spot of light suddenly lit up. It was extremely dazzling. It directly left the sword and merged into Chunzong's spirit. It was accompanied by an indescribable sadness, as if they were parting. Chunzong immediately felt a cooling power rush into his body. His spirit body, which had become faint, suddenly became extremely solid. Under the urging of an inexplicable power, Chunzong swung his sword with an indescribable sadness. When the sword rose, the spirit sea was filled with sadness. Chapter 29:57. The sword radiance was bright, clear, and serene. Within the sword radiance, sorrow flowed in reverse, traversing the universe. It was as if he had lost something extremely important in his heart and could not help but feel sad. Sorrow was about to spread, infecting the world and grieving the heavens and earth. The sword-sharpening mountain lord's soul body suddenly trembled. An indescribable sorrow immediately spread out, filling the surroundings. It was as if the saddest past in his heart had been drawn out, causing him to fall into a trance. The sword radiance had already arrived. It was the ultimate move of the demon sword technique, Eternal Night. As the sword radiance slashed out, the pitch-black sword radiance seemed to have come from the abyss, bringing with it an abyss-like darkness. The two sword radiances instantly collided. The sword radiance dissipated, but a terrifying force still shot towards the sword-sharpening mountain lord, piercing through his soul body. The powerful force wantonly destroyed his soul body. Horrified and shocked, the sword-sharpening mountain lord did not know what had happened. His opponent's strength was inferior to his, and his sword technique was also inferior to his, yet he could unleash such a powerful and terrifying sword radiance. Its power was so strong that even the sword-sharpening mountain lord could not block it. Even though the sword-sharpening mountain lord's power had been greatly reduced due to the damage to his soul, it was still the ultimate move of the unparalleled sword technique. Run! The sword-sharpening mountain lord was afraid. The power of his soul had been greatly depleted, and his soul body had also become faint. His aura had withered. Although he still had the power to fight, if he continued fighting, would something happen that would cause his soul to collapse? He could not let his million-year plan die here. Without any hesitation, with a thought, the sword-sharpening mountain lord immediately fled into the black sword in his hand. In the next moment, the black sword erupted with a startling might. As black light permeated the surroundings, with a flash, it directly left Chen Zong's sea of consciousness and appeared outside. It directly turned into a streak of dark light and vanished into outer space. He had left. The sword-sharpening mountain lord had truly left Chen Zong's body and left. As Chen Zong had forcefully dispersed the power of the cannon of the fiend god sword, his compatibility with the sword-sharpening mountain lord's soul had greatly decreased. If the sword-sharpening mountain lord wanted to possess and truly control Chen Zong's body, it would be many times more difficult. Coupled with the fact that his soul was in danger of collapsing, even if there was only the slightest possibility, he was not willing to take this risk. Only when the sword-sharpening mountain chief fled did Chen Zong let out a sigh of relief. His consciousness returned to his body, and he could not help but smile bitterly when he sensed the condition of his body. Tragic. Heavy losses. First, it was the injuries on his body. Due to him forcefully dispersing his cultivation of the celestial demon sword codex, he had suffered heavy injuries all over his body. If an ordinary cultivator suffered such severe injuries, they would have died immediately. It was a miracle that Chen Zong was still alive. After all, his cultivation came from the godly demon sword codex, and the more he cultivated it to the third stage, the deeper the connection. To a certain extent, the godly demon sword codex cultivated body refinement and chi refinement, and the body refinement had the meaning of forging an extraordinary treasure body. It was comparable to king bodies, saint bodies, and even divine bodies. By forcefully dispersing his cultivation, he had injured himself. His powerful body had also weakened, and he had become extremely weak. Chen Zong felt as if he would collapse if a gust of wind blew. How to describe it? It was like a tree growing. As it gradually grew, its roots would spread all over the land. If the tree was forcefully uprooted, the integrity of the land would be destroyed. Not only would the integrity of the exterior be destroyed, but the integrity of the interior would also be destroyed. In short, Chen Zong's body was in a terrible state. The powerful strength brought about by the heavenly gold sword body had disappeared. In addition, his soul was in an intense battle with the sword-sharpening mountain chief's soul. His strength was constantly being depleted, and he was constantly being injured by the sword. Now, his soul was also in a very weak state. Moreover, his essence, qi, and spirit had been devoured. Although he could regenerate, it was not so easy. This was an unprecedented weakness. Chunzong had never experienced such weakness before. Fortunately, the mysterious seed in his sea of qi still had an exuberant vitality. Chunzong mobilized it, and it quickly filled his entire body. A clear stream flowed continuously, healing his injured body as he fell. Could he no longer fly after losing his cultivation? No, under the quasi-supreme sword realm, Chunzong was still able to fly in the sky. It was like a bird, and it had become a type of instinct that was ingrained in his bone. It didn't have any definite connection with the fiend god sword mantra. Of course, losing his cultivation would directly cause Chunzong's flying speed to decrease drastically. This was inevitable. Similarly, Chunzong losing his cultivation did not mean that he no longer had any strength. Cultivation was a part of one's strength, but not everything. Losing his cultivation did not mean that he had completely lost his strength. However, cultivation was a very important part of one's strength. It was the foundation. Without cultivation, many techniques would lack something, and it would directly cause one's strength to decrease drastically. It would weaken one's strength by at least 10 times. Less than 1 out of 10 would survive. What was worse was that Chunzong realized that his perception of the 5 great Daos was also fading. It became blurry and thin. After landing safely, Chunzong felt that his body was very weak. In fact, his current physique was still relatively strong compared to a heaven-rank cultivator who had not refined his body. It was just that he was not as strong as when he had mastered the heavenly gold sword body. This time, his injuries were too severe. Even if the mysterious seed's vitality kept surging and healing, it was unable to heal Chunzong in a short time. However, it was able to heal his heavy injuries and reduce Chunzong's pain. Not daring to stay, Chunzong quickly left while healing his injuries. He did not want other cultivators to be attracted by the fluctuations here. That would be very disadvantageous to him. Moreover, Chunzong did not forget that the quasi-sage Lord Jinxian, who was killed by the sword-sharpening mountain lord, was an expert from the heavenly dragon Holy Land. His death would be known by the heavenly dragon Holy Land sooner or later. Perhaps they already knew. Old and new grudges. Although it was the sword-sharpening mountain lord who killed him, he would eventually come for him. For a time, Chunzong's thoughts were in extreme disorder. He'd suffered heavy injuries, lost his formidable cultivation, and his senses towards the sword Tao, Tao of the heart, Tao of the world, Tao of time, and Tao of space had become weak. If this continued, it might be severed. That would be equivalent to him losing the ability to mobilize and utilize the quintessence energy of the 5 grand Daos, and his strength would imperceptibly decline a step further. Lost cultivation could be cultivated back. After all, it was not destroyed by others. It was dissipated by oneself. The meaning was different. However, the connection with the great Daos of heaven and earth was cut off. Chunzong did not know how to reconnect with them. When cultivators comprehended the great Daos, they used their own great Daos to mobilize the corresponding great Daos of heaven and earth in order to enhance their own strength. This was the cultivation method of cultivators below the saint rank. If one lost the connection with the great Daos of heaven and earth, it meant that one's strength would be greatly reduced. Chunzong was now facing such a dilemma. As he ran, Chunzong's speed also increased rapidly. The injuries on his body were gradually healing under the vigorous vitality of the mysterious seed. However, there was still a sense of weakness. As time passed, it gradually disappeared. Chunzong had adapted to this body again. Without the power of cultivation, the strength of his body was not as strong as before. Fortunately, his realm was not affected. Chernzong was able to maintain a decent speed and leave the battlefield. As for the weakening of his divine soul and the lost essence, qi, and spirit, it would take more time to recover. With his extraordinary perception, Chernzong did not sense any danger. He gradually slowed down and thought carefully. This time, he took the initiative to disperse the power of the Fiend God Sword Codex. Other than severing his connection with the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord, it was also because of some thoughts or inspiration that occasionally flashed through Chernzong's mind when he was comprehending the single-hearted sword technique. However, that inspiration was fragmented and incomplete. As such, Chernzong was not very certain. However, now that things had progressed to this stage, with the combination of various factors, he was destined to have to make a choice. If he was unwilling to give up on the cultivation brought by the Fiend God Sword mantra, he would definitely continue to be entangled with the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. He did not know when he would be possessed again. He would not be so lucky every time. Rather than that, he might as well give up the inheritance that did not belong to him. This was because the inheritance of the Fiend God Sword Codex was part of the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord's plan. He wanted to find a suitable vessel to carry his divine soul and return to the universe. Obtaining the sword-sharpening technique and entering the sword-sharpening mountain to obtain various Great Tao sword techniques was a test to see if he was qualified to inherit the Fiend God Sword Codex. In other words, it was a test to see if he was qualified to become the vessel of the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. Now, the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord had escaped. Chernzong did not know where he went. With his injuries, it would not be easy for him to recover. However, Chernzong was sure of one thing. If the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord recovered, he might come to him for revenge. Enemies at the level of the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land and the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord gave him a headache just thinking about it. Even so, Chernzong didn't feel dejected or discouraged. He didn't give up hope because of this. He was still alive and he still had some strength. He also had the quasi-supreme sword realm, so he still had some strength. That meant that there was still hope. With the loss of his cultivation, Chernzong was more prone to fatigue. Fortunately, he found a relatively remote place in the mountains as a temporary resting place to recover his physical strength. At the same time, he also allowed the power of his spirit and essence to gradually recover. Standing on a naturally formed obelisk, Chernzong looked ahead. At this moment it was evening and the sun was setting. I lost my cultivation and my great Tao was severed. Chernzong's eyes became more and more profound as he stared at the endless distance ahead. There was a dazzling red glow. It was as bright as a burning cloud, blooming with an indescribable brilliance that shone in all directions. It fell on Chernzong's body and also on Chernzong's face. It was reflected in Chernzong's bright and clear eyes. It doesn't matter if I have no cultivation or my great Tao is severed. After all, it belongs to others. Chernzong's expression became more and more determined. From now on, I will test my idea and walk a path that belongs to me alone. I will recover my strength and even break through my limit. The Heavenly Dragon Holy Land and the sword-sharpening Mountain Lord. What is there to fear? Chapter 2958. In the Butterfly Valley, a tyrannical aura soared into the sky, shattering the vacuum. It was filled with extreme anger. Find him. Find that Chernzong. I want him to suffer a fate worse than death. The voice filled with anger and killing intent was extremely violent. It shattered the space of the Butterfly Valley, bursting out cracked. It was the expert of the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land. Seeing the Heaven Realm experts whose cultivation was crippled, the anger in his heart was indescribable. It was like an ancient volcano that was constantly accumulating power, boiling magma, and about to erupt and destroy the world. He still didn't know that Lord Jin Xian had fallen. Otherwise, he would probably explode in anger. The loss of 64 Heaven Realm Final Realm Experts' cultivation being crippled was great. The loss of 4 Transcending Realm Experts' cultivation being crippled was even greater, especially the monstrous genius who left his name on the sealed sky monument. However, it couldn't be compared to the loss of a quasi-saint. The heavenly dragon Holy Land had been passed down for countless years. There weren't just 1 or 2 Saint Realm experts, there were quite a few of them. As for the quasi-saints, there weren't many of them. They were on par with the Saint Realm experts. The outcome of failing to break through to the Saint Realm in the inner universe was death. Only those who survived could become a quasi-saint. However, the probability was very low. It wasn't much different from the difficulty of breaking through to the Saint Realm. The Saint Realm experts wouldn't usually appear. Therefore, the person in charge of every Holy Land was a quasi-saint. The quasi-saints had some of the power of the Saint Realm. Their strength was far superior to the Heaven Realm. However, they couldn't improve and couldn't break through to the Saint Realm in their lifetime, even if they had a great opportunity. In this way, the quasi-saints didn't need to spend time on cultivation. They just needed to maintain it. In addition, they needed to comprehend and sharpen their martial arts to improve their strength. The quasi-saints had more time. They stayed in the Holy Land and dealt with the various affairs of the Holy Land. As for the Saint Realm experts, there was still hope for them to improve. Naturally, they would focus on comprehending in seclusion. The loss of a quasi-saint was really shocking. At least for thousands of years, the heavenly dragon Holy Land hadn't suffered such a loss. However, the news was difficult to suppress. Like a storm, it swept out, and even more people learned about it. Yu Feilong of the Heavenly Dragon Holy Ground wanted to deal with Wushuang Jiandi Chunzong and set up a grand killing formation in the Butterfly Valley. However, his cultivation base was destroyed and his cultivation base was crippled. The Heavenly Dragon Holy Ground's secondary sage, Venerable Jin Xian, personally went to deal with Chunzong. They were all directly related to Chunzong. Peerless Jiandi Chunzong had actually crippled dozens of Heaven Realm experts and 4 Heaven Realm experts of the Heavenly Dragon Holy Ground. One of them was the Soaring Dragon Divine Sword, Yu Feilong. It was truly shocking. But at the same time, many people felt speechless. Why didn't they kill him but cripple his cultivation? What was the reason behind this? Or was this a personal quirk of hers? Did he have a hobby of crippling people? Some people sorted out Chunzong's past experiences and found that Chunzong had never killed anyone. The most serious thing he had done was to chop off his limbs and cripple his cultivation base. However, most of the time, it was just crippling his cultivation base. No solution. As for the fall of Venerable Jin Xian, a secondary sage, it was even more shocking. It was pointed out that Chunzong had something to do with it. However, no one believed that Venerable Jin Xian was killed by Chunzong. After all, no matter how powerful Chunzong was, he was at most an invincible Heaven Realm expert. How could he be a match for a secondary sage? Everyone guessed that other experts must have made a move. For example, Chunzong's master or someone like that. Perhaps he was a martial sage expert among the rogue cultivators. Although there were not many rogue cultivators, some of them were very shocking. There were even martial sage-level rogue cultivators. Chunzong's combat strength had improved so quickly. In addition, he had lived for hundreds of years but still maintained a youthful appearance. He must have had a great opportunity. Of course, it could not be ruled out that he was a disciple of a rogue cultivator. But after thinking about it, there seemed to be no rogue cultivator who could maintain a youthful appearance with superb sword Dao. Could it be that he was an ancient martial sage expert? In any case, this speculation made people more curious and fearful of Chunzong. But at the same time, many people were looking for Chunzong's whereabouts. In the Heavenly Dragon Holy Land, a martial sage expert came out of seclusion. His fingers were suffused with a wisp of dark golden light. He drew in the air, leaving behind a trail. The trail looked incomparably mysterious, like a dancing dragon. But in the next moment, the dark golden light cracked inch by inch and directly shattered. My Dao-seeking formula can't deduce Chen Zong's whereabouts. The martial sage expert frowned, surprised and bewildered. He did not know that at this moment, Chen Zong's connection with the great Tao of heaven and earth had been completely severed and isolated. It was equivalent to saying that Chen Zong had lost the power of the great Tao. In this way, his Tao-seeking formula naturally could not work. The Tao-seeking formula, as the name implied, must have a connection with the great Tao. Could it be that there is really a martial sage expert who concealed the great Tao of heaven for him? The martial sage expert of the heavenly dragon Holy Land narrowed his eyes slightly, and a murderous look flashed in his eyes. But no matter who it was, no matter which martial sage it was, if he dared to kill a secondary sage of the heavenly dragon Holy Land, he would have to bear the wrath of the heavenly dragon Holy Land. Chen Zong did not know that many people were looking for his whereabouts. There were even martial sage experts who were personally deducing the great Tao of heaven. This mountain was a very ordinary one. The yuan energy here was relatively thin, and there were not many powerful beasts residing here. Usually, very few practitioners would come here. The location that Chen Zong had chosen was also relatively remote and uninhabited, making it even more difficult to find him. At this moment, Chen Zong was sad because of the sword in his hand. The Heavenly Will Sword. This sword had changed greatly. It was hard to imagine that this was the Heavenly Will Sword. Its color was gray and the sword was covered with lines. If one looked carefully, they were not lines, but cracks. Chen Zong knew that the Heavenly Will Sword was made of extraordinary materials. Even a martial sage expert would find it very difficult to destroy it. But now, the sword was covered with cracks, as if it would really shatter with a little force. It was a shocking sight. Why was it like this? Chen Zong knew that this was because when his spiritual body and the sword-grinding mountain lord's spiritual body were fighting fiercely, the Heavenly Will Sword erupted with its origin and merged with Chen Zong's spiritual body to display the strongest sword move. It injured the sword-grinding mountain lord and made him escape. Origin. To any living being or non-living being, it was the core and the most important thing. The Heavenly Will Sword's final origin erupted and merged with Chen Zong's spiritual body to display the strongest sword move. The Heavenly Will Sword's sword spirit also dissipated. It was because of the disappearance of the origin and the disappearance of the sword spirit that the Heavenly Will Sword looked so gray and broken. The Heavenly Will Sword was closely related to him. Naturally, Chen Zong was very sad that it had fallen to this state. He did not know how to restore the Heavenly Will Sword. No matter how he thought about it, Chen Zong could not think of a way to do so. The origin dissipated, the sword's spirit disappeared. It had to be said that his loss this time was so great that it was immeasurable. His cultivation had completely dissipated. Of course, he had no choice but to do so, and there were also some subjective factors. But in the end, he had lost it, and his strength had greatly decreased. His great Tao had been severed, and his strength had decreased even further. The Heavenly Will Sword's origin dissipated, the sword spirit disappeared, and its power was completely gone. Was this a terrible loss? If it had been anyone else, they would have already lost all hope. When Chen Zong thought about it, he could not help but feel a sense of despair. But he was still alive, and there was still hope. Never stop improving. His finger gently brushed across the Heavenly Will Sword. There was no spiritual fluctuation, and it felt rough to the touch. There was a feeling of death, especially when his finger brushed across the cracks on its surface. That feeling made Chen Zong's mind waver, and he felt even more uncomfortable. With a long sigh, Chen Zong's gaze on the Heavenly Will Sword grew gentler. Apart from his family, this sword was the most important thing to him. As his finger gently stroked the sword, Chen Zong's gaze grew deeper and deeper, and he seemed to be in a trance. Vaguely, Chen Zong thought back to the beginning. When he was born with insufficient qi and blood, it was difficult for him to cultivate. Then, an opportunity fell from the sky. Since then, his meridians had been cleansed, and he had been reborn. From then on, he had embarked on the path of cultivation. At that time, he had formed a connection with the Heart Sword seal, or rather, the Heavenly Will Sword. As Chen Zong continued to cultivate and improve, his connection with the Heavenly Will Sword had unknowingly deepened. Finally, when he had obtained the complete Heavenly Will Sword, his blood had connected, and it had merged with his spirit. The past was vivid in his mind, and it flowed through his mind. Chen Zong could not help but tear up. It was heartbreak, and he was also moved. Reforge the Heavenly Will Sword. Without any hesitation, Chen Zong had already decided to do this long ago. It was just that he hadn't been able to find any clues. As his mind spun, Chen Zong kept thinking. There were many problems with him now. Cultivation. Great Tao. Heavenly Will Sword. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. If so, could he connect the three? The origin of the Heavenly Will Sword has merged with my spirit. The sword's spirit has disappeared because of this. Chen Zong frowned. He thought hard, vaguely grasping something. If so, why not use my spirit as the sword spirit? With his spirit as the sword spirit, the Heavenly Will Sword could regain its spirituality and regain its strength. The Heavenly Will Sword was connected to his blood, and it was completely integrated with his spirit. However, using his spirit to become the sword spirit of the Heavenly Will Sword did not mean that he had to abandon his body. Chen Zong's idea became clearer. He could merge the Heavenly Will Sword with his body. While his spirit dominated his body, it also dominated the Heavenly Will Sword. One spirit could use two spirit. This method was feasible. Chen Zong's eyes brightened. He seemed to have found the right path. Merge the sword with the body. Merge the body with the sword. For a moment, his idea became clearer and clearer. Chen Zong's eyes also became brighter. All kinds of fragments of inspiration emerged, and they constantly combined, becoming complete. The other path became clearer, and Chen Zong saw hope. He was more confident, and he was no longer in the same predicament as before. If he could really do this, then the loss of his cultivation, the severing of his great path, and the destruction of the Heavenly Sword would be resolved. In fact, he would become even more powerful than before. Thinking of this, Chen Zong's eyes became extremely bright. They were like two blazing suns, emitting an unparalleled light that illuminated everything. It was the light of hope. Chapter 29:59. In the remote mountains, the vitality was thin. Birds and beasts were nowhere to be seen, and traces of humans were scarce. There was only one figure standing upright with a sword in his hand. His back was straight, and he was like a sharp sword pointing to the sky. Chen Zong's eyes were extremely bright, like the sun shining in all directions. His heart was full of hope. In his mind, countless inspirations emerged. These inspirations became clearer and clearer, making Chen Zong more determined on his path. The Heart Sutra was constantly running, and the strong power of mind was also fluctuating. Ever since Chen Zong obtained the Heart Sutra, he had been practicing it. From the initial realm of 1 mind to 10 intents, to 100 intents, to 1,000 intents. After that, he specially returned to the void to find his master, exhilarating master, to study and discuss together. Based on his Grandmaster's experience, he deduced the 5th realm of the Heart Sutra, the realm of wholehearted sincerity. The realm of wholehearted sincerity meant the limit of the Heart Sutra. At least, Chen Zong and exhilarating master thought so. However, after Chen Zong mastered the realm of wholehearted sincerity, he continued to train and improve himself. Gradually, he felt that the realm of wholehearted sincerity of the Heart Sutra did not seem to be the end. There was still the possibility of further improvement. However, Chen Zong did not know how to improve, because the realm of wholehearted sincerity was the result of continuous discussion with his master, Exin Dao Master, based on his grandmaster's experience. If he wanted to continue improving, the difficulty would be 10 times greater. Until now, by chance, Chen Zong grasped that little bit of inspiration and expanded it. Only then there was hope. Since I've come this far, I have no way back, Chen Zong said to himself in a determined tone. At this point, no matter what the reason was, it was a fact that he had lost his cultivation, the Great Way, and the Sky Sword was damaged. The fact was that it had happened to him. No matter what he said, it was meaningless. Even though he had a burst of inspiration and was now more confident, it was still not 100%. However, Chen Zong could only take the risk. If he succeeded, he would embark on his own path and walk on his own magnificent sword way. If he failed, it would not be worse than now. In that case, what would the next level of the One Heart Sutra be? As the spiritual light appeared, the One Heart Sutra would replace all other cultivation techniques, and the original auxiliary cultivation technique would become the main cultivation technique. In other words, once he successfully broke through, he would not be able to cultivate any other cultivation techniques, even if he had the opportunity to obtain a better cultivation technique than the Divine Demon Sword Codex. For a long time, ever since he obtained the Heart Sutra, he had used it as an auxiliary skill. Now, it was mainly used as an auxiliary skill. In that case, how could he break through the limits of the One Heart Sutra, break through to a higher realm, and become the main support? What Chen Zong wanted to do was to activate the heart returning to nature realm of the Heart Sutra. Chen Zong had seen the collapse of stars, the collapse of the world, the sudden changes of heaven and earth, and so on. All of these gave him inspiration at this moment. Under the wholehearted pure realm, a powerful mind energy circulated in his body endlessly. It was like a whirlpool that spun endlessly. It was like a river that flowed endlessly. It was like the surging waves of the sea that flowed endlessly. His aura was extremely vigorous. Chen Zong broke out a strong will, forcibly stopping the mind power of the heart returning to nature realm from rotating, and then it started rotating in the opposite direction, reversing the heart returning to nature realm. This was the way Chen Zong thought of to break the limits of the One Heart Sutra and the heart returning to nature realm. Reversing the heart returning to nature realm was extremely difficult. It was like forcibly moving a mountain. Chen Zong's expression changed greatly, and he seemed to have exhausted all his strength. His forehead was covered with blue veins, and he clenched his teeth so hard that they almost broke. It moved. Under Chen Zong's incomparable efforts, the power of the heart returning to nature realm slowly started rotating in the opposite direction. As soon as it started rotating, Chen Zong's body trembled unconsciously. He only felt that his internal organs, bones, muscles, and even skin were all hit by a strong force, as if they were about to be crushed. His whole body seemed to be completely crushed and directly crushed into pieces. It was simply impossible to imagine such a feeling. However, Chen Zong's body was unscathed. The feeling of being crushed into powder was a direct effect on Chen Zong's divine will. It was a feeling in his mind. Reversing bit by bit, all the strength in his body seemed to be sucked into it. In the next moment, Chen Zong only felt that his mind trembled, and his essence, qi, and spirit were all absorbed and out of his control. It was out of control. Chen Zong's expression changed greatly. It was out of control. Once it was out of control, everything that followed would no longer be under his control. Under the loss of control, The power of the heart returning to nature realm was like a runaway wild horse becoming crazy. Its reversing speed suddenly increased by more than 10 times. His body seemed to be crushed inch by inch, and even his divine soul was the same. The pain was crazily sweeping over him, and it was several times worse than before. Am I going to fail? This thought flashed through Chunzong's mind. Once it failed, according to the current situation, the consequences would be very serious. His essence, chi, spirit, and divine soul would be severely damaged. Sure enough, it was not easy to find one's own path. It was too difficult, especially when it was an unprecedented path. It was a path that no one had ever walked before. It meant that he had to create a new path by himself, without any experience to refer to. A sudden change occurred. The Taihao spirit fire that had been in Chunzong's spirit sea suddenly swayed, as if it was swaying in the wind. It directly turned into a beam of light and entered Chunzong's body. Chunzong's expression changed greatly. At this moment, the mind power, essence, chi, spirit, and divine soul of the heart returning to nature realm in his body were all in chaos. They kept colliding with each other, as if Chunzong's body was the battlefield. Chunzong felt that his body was collapsing from the deepest part of his body. Now, the Taihao spirit fire took the opportunity to join in the battle, making the conflict even more intense. This time I've been too careless. Chunzong couldn't help but smile bitterly. His consciousness was getting more and more blurry. Soon, the bitter smile turned into a touch of determination. Since it's like this, I don't care. I'll give it my all. If I fail, it's okay. But if I succeed, with his last consciousness, Chunzong raised the heavenly will sword in his hand. It was gray and full of cracks. Although it looked like the sword would break with a little force, in fact, it was not. The sword's material was extremely tough. It was not that easy to break. Chunzong raised the sword high. Then, he stabbed it down. The target was his own body. It pierced through his chest. His body was no longer the same as before. The heavenly will sword easily pierced through his body until only the hilt was left. When the heavenly will sword pierced through his body, the 4 conflicting forces in Chunzong's body seemed to be disturbed. They became more and more violent. Chaos. The inside of his body was getting more and more chaotic. I've formed my own Tao. With a last glimmer of hope, Chunzong's consciousness sank. He fainted. But his whole body was still. His body was as straight as a sword. He was motionless, as if he had taken root in the ground. But when he opened his eyes, they were blank. There was no light. It was as if he had lost his soul. In Chunzong's body, the 4 forces were constantly clashing and exploding. Again, and at his chest, there was a sword hilt. No matter how you looked at it, it was strange. His body was the battlefield, and all his powers were madly fighting and killing each other. They were also constantly being consumed, and as they were consumed, a new strand of power was born. When the new strand of power appeared, it revealed its extraordinary power and began to nibble away at other powers step by step. As it devoured other powers, the new strand of power also grew stronger and stronger. The sword in Chunzong's body seemed to be melting under the new force. It melted inch by inch. After it melted, it merged into Chunzong's body. The sun rose and the moon set. Night and day alternated. Chunzong was still standing, as if he had turned into a statue. The scorching sun hung high in the sky, shining down, bringing with it an astonishing heat. After that, the autumn wind rustled, incomparably bleak. A cold and solemn aura permeated between heaven and earth. After that, the cold wind blew like wind blades, bringing with it an astonishing chill like frost swords. Snowflakes drifted down. They fell on the mountain and also on Chunzong's body. Slowly they covered him. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The 4 seasons rotated. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, the thick snow began to melt. It was the arrival of spring. After the snow melted, Chernzong's body was revealed once again. The sword hilt in his chest had disappeared at some point in time. His entire body was devoid of any aura, as if he was dead. Suddenly, an indescribable breath spread from Chernzong's body. It was as if all living things had come back to life. The sound of a heartbeat was heard. Thump, thump, thump. It was as if a giant beast had awakened. The sound of his heartbeat became more obvious, like the beating of a drum. Chernzong's skin was originally grayish-white, as if it had been smeared with a layer of lime. As his heart beat, the grayish-white color gradually receded and was replaced by a vibrant color. Gradually, his skin became ruddy. His dull gray eyes gradually lit up. It was as if a group of stars were blooming and condensing. As his eyes moved, Chernzong's neck moved. He lowered his head to look at his body. He raised his hands and a look of surprise appeared on his face. The feeling was indescribable. It was very strange. Immediately, Chernzong checked himself. It was a good thing that he was still alive. But what about the rest? Was the breakthrough of the One Heart Sutra a success or a failure? If it was a success, what kind of changes would it bring to him? Although Chernzong had speculated before, it was just speculation. After all, it was not the truth. After carefully feeling it, Chernzong looked surprised and doubtful. It seemed that it was indeed different from his speculation. Without testing it, Chernzong did not know whether it was good or bad. But then again, he was still alive. His breakthrough should be a success. This was a good thing. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.